Actually, we'll start with the invocation and then follow it up with the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Councilmember Joe Anderson will be lead us in the invocation. Joe? Please rise.
Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, as we reflect on the needs of our community and make decisions for our future, send down upon us the spirit of wisdom, charity, and justice, that steadfast purpose we may faithfully serve our offices well to promote the well-being of all people. To Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And City Clerk, would you mind taking roll call?
Yes. Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Noonenkamp?
Present.
Member Russell?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Present.
Member Wink?
Present.
Member Woodward?
Present.
Mayor Sierra?
Present.
All 7 are present.
Thank you. Up first, agenda item 4 is the use of city right-of-way by third parties. Tonight, City Attorney Tamara Niles will be present to discuss with council the use of city right-of-way by third parties. Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm 12 feet apart. I'm stretching my arms out to see how long they are. Also joining me tonight is Tim Hose from the Public Works Department, who will also be presenting on the city practice of regulating its right-of-ways, and I will present at the beginning on city regulations contained within municipal code. I'm not sure who's putting the PowerPoint up on the board, but hopefully it's up there shortly. In the meantime, we do have the PowerPoint in the packet, so I will just start from the PowerPoint that's in the packet, starting on page 7. There's a significant amount of laws regulating the city's right-of-way, including federal, state, and local laws and regulations. It applies to how we acquire right-of-way for federally funded projects, preemption of the city's ability to regulate in some instances, such as regarding telecommunications providers. And then our municipal code also contains detailed usage requirements for city right-of-way. So this presentation is just, of course I'm a lawyer, I have to give a disclaimer. This presentation is supposed to just be a general overview. What right-of-way is and how you regulate it could easily be contained within multiple books. So this is just a very high-level overview. So what is right-of-way? Generally, it includes streets and sidewalks for pedestrian and vehicular traffic. It can be designated as right-of-way on plats when someone creates a new neighborhood, for example. And it can be designated in areas that the city acquires for infrastructure and utilities, such as the city ditch. Our municipal code defines right-of-way with a pretty specific definition there. But it's, in general, property owned or controlled by the city for public use, for infrastructure improvements, vehicular traffic, etc. And the right-of-way is also the entire width between boundary lines of property owned by the city and dedicated by the city for vehicular or pedestrian traffic. The city takes a two-pronged approach to regulation of its right-of-way. We have binding laws and regulations contained within Inglewood Municipal Code, and then we also regulate it through contracts, including franchise agreements and licenses that we specifically give to people that enables them to specifically use our right-of-way in a certain manner. This includes our city right-of-way license agreement, which we recently completely redrafted the contract license documents to allow people to utilize our right-of-way. So we now have an extensive master license agreement, and I put a copy of that in your packet so that you could see what it looks like, which is a 24-page framework for people that want to use our right-of-way. So we are all on the same page. There's no misunderstandings about what people can do, how they can do it, how they request our permission, how we know exactly what's in our right-of-way and who put it there, and in case of emergency, how we can call you in the middle of the night and tell you there's a problem. So it does incorporate also municipal code provisions, but then provides more detail and more specific usage for that specific person. And this can, of course, be anything from somebody that wants to put in fiber or cable in our right-of-way, somebody that wants to put a bus shelter on our right-of-way. It's intended to encompass every use for anyone that wants to come in and do something on property that otherwise solely belongs to us.
City Attorney, do you mind if I stop you there?
No, go ahead.
I'm being told that there's a terrible echo on the Zoom. And I'm just wondering from Deputy City Clerk if we happen to know how long it would be before the echo gets fixed.
I know they're working on it right now, so I'll go check on them again.
Okay. I know that this is a subject that I've been getting calls about and requests about, so if we're having a terrible echo, I'm wondering if we could just take a quick pause, if anybody. Member Wink, are you hearing that same echo as well? Thank you, Member
I
Wink.
am. It's really exaggerated on my end.
Would this council be okay if we just take a 5-minute break while they work on it? All right, is that okay, City Attorney, while we? Give us a second here.
Yes, if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt me. That's perfectly fine with me.
Mayor Sierra, if we could just make sure everybody's mic on there, if they are logged into Zoom or anything, is turned off on their computers also. When
Okay.
you're muted.
Anybody else has their Zoom on at the moment? Doesn't look like it, so. Can't really tell if there's an echo if we stop talking though, right?
I guess Member Wink would know if there's an echo because she's on Zoom.
I'll say that the last thing that Attorney Niles just said when she offered to address questions, that was perfect. That had no echo whatsoever.
Member Wink, we're having trouble hearing you, so I don't think it's on your end. I think it's how it's being projected into this room.
Okay.
Actually, say that again. Member Wink, I think you came in that time.
Okay, Roger.
Yep, there you go.
Got it. Okay.
It's a little bit better, but we probably need her a little bit louder than that. By the way, do I come through clearly with this thing on, or you guys can hear me okay? Okay.
Yes.
Should I try again, or?
Sure. Sure, yep, happy to.
Sorry, the issue was, I guess it was getting too high, we were getting feedback, so we turned the master down, which means then our online person is too low, so we have to push her up. So can we tried to redo the levels, can we just see how we are talking right now, are we?
Did you want me to check here internally first and then Member Wink?
Yeah,
So-
let's check here, we're good, is she hearing? us?
Hello?
Okay.
Member Wink, do you hear us okay through the mics?
I can hear you okay, Mayor.
We're testing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. We're not too hot in here.
No.
Okay.
That's perfect.
And then check with Member Wink now.
Testing.
Member Wink, can you speak up? Go ahead.
Testing. This is my normal voice volume. Yep, I'm speaking.
Do we want
Is that
to
okay?
turn the whole thing up just a hair? Okay.
Thank you, Member Wink.
You're welcome, Mayor.
Shall I resume?
Well, let's just double check that Member Wink that we can hear Member Wink clearly, and are we good on her volume? Go ahead, Member Wink.
I pledge allegiance to the flag. Oh, wait, I probably shouldn't say that. Federally funded projects in Englewood Municipal Code and overview of the city's regulations for providers. Yeah.
Yeah, we hear you clearly. I think we're ready to go.
Okay.
Do you hear an echo at all, Member Wink?
No, I do not.
Okay, perfect. I think we are ready to resume. Thank you, everyone. City Attorney?
Excellent. During our brief break, Councilmember Woodward just asked me a question about the city regulation of right-of-way slide, which is on page 9 of the packet, where I said the city takes a two-prong approach to regulation of right-of-way, using both the applicable laws and our contracting system. And Councilmember Woodward, what was your specific question regarding that?
I just wanted to get clear for myself, who probably missed some of these, but I was aware of 2 citizens coming forward, at least from September forward, with complaints about installations that were going on the easement on their property that were not acceptable. Was there more than that?
I'm not aware of any others. And I think we will go into that in a little bit because those weren't authorized by code, nor were they in compliance with law.
Okay.
So that's really what prompted this presentation.
Yes, okay. And then on the next page, city regulation of row, you used the word gift to people. I didn't quite understand what that meant.
And I'm sorry, which slide is that?
City regulation of right-of-way.
Yes, and the gift?
And I thought I heard you say right at the very end, and gifts to people.
No.
Okay.
We don't do anything for free when it comes to right-of-way.
No, that's why I'm asking, because I misunderstood or I didn't hear what you said.
And I make a joke, but it's because it does require licenses. It requires permits. There are so many people and entities that want to use our right-of-way that we have to carefully regulate it to make sure that every appropriate use is given the opportunity to use it, because it can provide so many benefits to the people here, such as utilities.
Mm-hmm. That's the only questions I had.
Okay. Then I'll go back to what is page number 11. There we are. We have a significant municipal code regarding our right-of-way. Chapter 7 and Title 11 is the sole topic of right-of-way permits and requirements, which is 26 pages of regulation. So our code does extensively define and regulate what you can and can't do on our right-of-way, including how to respond to emergencies and things like that. So with that, I will turn it over to Tim to go through specific sections of our code and city procedure.
All right, thank you, City Attorney Niles. I'm Tim Host, Deputy Director of Public Works for Engineering and Asset Management. Good evening, everybody. We'll try to get back to the PowerPoint here. I think the first slide I have is I'll start going through those 26 pages of regulations that City Attorney Niles referenced in the city code here. So the first one is permit required. It's obviously we require permits for any kind of work in the right-of-way. We make sure we know who's doing what and where they're doing it and when. So the first thing each contractor needs to get is a license, a contractor's license, and that requires them to have a significant amount of liability insurance as well as a performance bond if they cause any damage. So those are 2 things that are required in order to get a permit. Then I'll go into the next slide here is types of permits. We've got 3 different types of permits we issue for construction work in the city's right-of-way.
Sorry, can I interrupt briefly?
Sure.
The previous slide, all work in city right-of-way requires a permit except certain routine maintenance. Can you give an example of what routine maintenance would constitute?
Sure. So that it would include anything. Really, it's pretty limited to anything that doesn't affect the right-of-way. If you're off on the edge trimming your bushes or something like that, maybe something that's not going to impede the pedestrians or the traffic. I did read through some of that, and it's very limited. There's not a whole lot of things that don't require a permit.
Okay, so in this case, it would be something about like similar to an existing property owner rather than a utility contractor or somebody, doing
Right.
limited work in.
Right, it's more like refers to landscape maintenance and things like that, because the city right away extends a little bit beyond the back of the sidewalk, so if you're mowing your grass or whatever, obviously you don't need a permit for that kind of thing.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. All right, so we have the three types of permits here. So the first one is the occupancy permit, and that really is for if there's like a large vehicle or a crane or something that's going to be blocking the street for any amount of time, we require a permit to show how you're going to get traffic and pedestrians around your activity that you got going on in the right of way. So, and it's also for any kind of general street or sidewalk closures. If there's a tree trimming company out in the road or something, that's the type of permit they would need. So then the excavation permit, that's for anybody who's going to basically dig a hole in the right of way. If they're going to punch a hole in the sidewalk or the asphalt, we require the excavation permit, and there's different rules for how you backfill and how you restore the surface and that kind of thing. So then the third type we issue is a concrete permit. That's obviously for any kind of concrete work. If you're going to replace the sidewalk or a section of concrete street or something like that, any type of concrete work, you're required to have the concrete permit. That's the applicable permit for that. So then we've got the different fees here. I'm sorry, this is a little fuzzy here. I took this off of a PDF, but these are all of the different permit fees that we assess to people when they're doing different types of work. We've got basically each of these fees are more for the administrative cost to do the work, for the staff time to review the permit and make sure it's something we want to allow or that we can allow, and then the time to administer the actual document and collect the fees and that type of thing. So there's basically how we work it. There's a base fee, and then there's an hourly fee for the amount of time it takes staff to review the permit application, so that they can vary a little bit depending on the complexity of the application that we get. But each permit is reviewed for the type of work that's being done. If they're going to install a new facility or something, we look at those a little closer to make sure that they're not going to install a facility on top of an existing city facility, or they're not going to put it in the middle of our sidewalk or too close to the corner or something like that. We make sure that it's in a place that's not going to be in the way of the city's use of the right of way. We try to make sure that's done every time, so there's not a conflict where it causes problems for the city in the future to maintain our infrastructure as well. So then there's also one of the fees on here. There's a double fee if you don't get a permit. We charge you twice, for not getting a permit. You have to pay twice just for the inconvenience and the hopefully to discourage people from doing that. We don't want people to obviously be in the right of way without a permit there. We have three construction inspectors that inspect all of these permits, and they can't be everywhere at once. So there are times we get people that are trying to sneak by and get stuff done without a permit. And we're pretty good at catching them. A lot of times we'll hear from another city employee driving by or a resident or something, and we'll go out there and stop them and make sure they get a permit and they do the work right. So we can't be everywhere at once, but we do have eyes all over that we're able to catch most of that, and we don't have too much of that going on. So it works pretty well. So let's see, I think that's the main part of the fees here. And then we'll go into the this street utilization and degradation fee. So this is actually one fee that we do not have right now. The Inglewood City Code does not have a fee like this, and a lot of other cities do have a fee like this. And what it covers is anytime a contractor punches a hole in the street or cuts a hole in the road, it basically accelerates the degradation of the street. Anytime there's a crack or a joint there, it's not a seamless asphalt anymore, the concrete, so it does cause us to have to replace it sooner. So the degradation fee would be something that would be charged for that additional, more frequent maintenance we would have to do on the street. So that's something we are definitely looking at studying this a little more and coming up with a proposal to bring back to City Council later this year to possibly implement a fee like this to cover those costs, so the city's not having to pay the additional costs for the damage caused by the private utility contractors and things like that, because it is a cost that can add up over time. So we'll doing some study on that and kind of seeing how other cities do that, and we'll come back with a recommendation on a potential fee for this. next to what they're doing and they don't want to fix it, then we have a letter of credit to say you've broken the concrete, you need to do this repair, or we'll go after your performance bond. And it's actually a really good tool for just the threat to a contractor of going after this bond. Is it gets them to come around pretty quickly, because this is similar to kind of an insurance policy. If there's a claim on it, you don't usually get another performance bond in the future, so contractors don't like you to go after that. So it's a pretty good hammer we have to make sure that they do do the work right and they don't damage any of our property when they're out there. So then this next slide just talks about the performance warranty guarantee. So there is a 2-year warranty on any work that the contractors do in the right of way. So if there's any settlement of their trench, or the concrete breaks in those first 2 years, or the surface of it spalls or whatever, there is this performance warranty. We can call the contractor back in and have them make the repair. So we're not only covered immediately after the work, but for up to 2 years after the work as well. So we're very, very well covered. And then most of that, the 2 years, if it doesn't show up in the first 2 years, it's usually not going to be an issue. So that's a pretty good period we have there to make sure that the contractor's covering that. So, and then the next slide here we've got is inspections. Obviously, the city has the right
Deputy Director, do you mind if I just pause you there? It sounds,
Sure.
we have to pause the meeting. Are we having issues with the Zoom or with the? Okay. So Deputy Director, I'm going to stop you there and we'll resume once we get the audio to work again. Do we know how far back the audio stopped working? Member Wink, were you able to hear the audio, or did it shut off on you as well?
It shut off on me. If I'm being well metered about this, I think it maybe was 60 seconds of just no sound at all.
And that's what the people at home experienced as well.
Okay.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Member Wink. Is everyone okay if we take like a 5-minute recess, just because if we could come back around about 6:30, it's 6:24 right now. If we could come back at 6:30, we'll take a 6-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Mic check, mic check.
But yeah, he was trying to get rid of the.
All right, Member Wink, are you back? We're going to get started here since it's 6:30.
Yep. I am.
Thank you, Member Wink. And Deputy Director Hose, if you wouldn't mind going back, maybe a slide or
Yeah.
pick up, because it looks like we lost everyone for about a minute. So,
Sure,
Deputy
I can go-
Director.
Yeah, I can go back a couple slides here. Let's see, I can go back, I guess, should I go back to the insurance and indemnification here, maybe?
That would work
Too
for me.
far back. Whoop.
I don't
I'll
remember
go over
hearing
this.
that.
Is that about right? All right. So, yeah, so I'll go over the insurance and indemnification again. That is the insurance that's required of all contractors who have a license to work in the right of way. We require them to get this insurance before they can get a license and then a subsequent permit for the work. So, and it protects the city from any kind of claims or any liability for the contractors' work in the right of way. If they cause any accidents or any issues in the right of way, their insurance has to cover any of those issues like that. So that's the way those things are covered. And then the performance bond letter of credit, that's the other requirement of a contractor license, another document we require. So we require this letter of credit to cover the actual cost of the construction work. And then in the event the contractor doesn't finish the work or they damage another adjacent city facility or something like that, we have this letter of credit and bond that we can go after to require the contractor to pay for that work. If the contractor's not, if they go bankrupt or out of business, we can use this bond letter of credit to get our the funding we need to repair any damage they cause to the right of way. So that's what that's for. And then the performance warranty and guarantee, that's any work in the right of way is required to be warranted for 2 years for any kind of poor workmanship or any kind of trench settlement, or if the concrete cracks or surface spalls or any kind of construction defect that's caused by the contractor's work, then this warranty comes into play, and we we can contact the contractor and they're required to come out and make repairs. And then if for some reason we're not able to get a hold of the contractor, if they go bankrupt or they're gone, they change their phone number, whatever, that's why we have the letter of credit. That stays in place for the 2-year warranty period, so we can always have that as a backup to get the funding we need to repair any warranty issue that might have been caused by a contractor. Then we have the inspections requirement here. Obviously, the city has the right to inspect the work at any time. It's city property. They can't close us out of any kind of work they're doing in the right of way. The city is allowed to go and inspect the work at any time, and obviously we're allowed to reject any defective work and make sure they construct it to the city standards. So that's the rule in the city code that requires that, and make sure contractors are understand that we can come and go whenever we want to inspect their work. So then we have time of completion. So the permits do have an expiration date. They don't last forever. Once you get a permit, you have to start the work at least within 6 months. Permits expire 6 months after they're granted, unless the work is done sooner, obviously. But the other thing we do with this time of completion, as the permits come in, we do try to kind of look at where contractors are working and make sure we don't have 2 contractors working in the same location that may have conflicting traffic control or something. We got one guy working down here, and there's a big mess. We try to time it out so there's only one contractor on one street at a time, so we don't have those types of issues where there's a jumbled mess of cones and signs and things that's confusing. We make sure that the contractors kind of share the right of way. Some of them, have to take a back seat to ones that are already working out there if they want to do something. So we do try to keep an eye on that so we don't have a major issue in the right of way with too many contractors trying to work on one street at the same time. So then the next slide here, I think, is this the general use in construction. So this basically just refers to that they still need to, contractors still need to allow businesses and residents to get to their property and to come and go. You can't just take the whole street up and not let people get in and out of their property or their business. You've got to be able to work with the people who are already there and make accommodations. And we require that of our own contractors who work for the city as well as these private contractors. We want to make sure people can come and go. I mean, there's certainly times when we may have a trench in front of your driveway or something, you may not be able to come and go, but we do try to make sure the contractor accommodates as best they can, at least every night when they're done working, that everybody can get back into their driveway and all the businesses can get in and out. So the other thing and then the other thing with this is that they can't interfere with the city's use of the right of way. Obviously we have facilities out there as well. If we need to get to one of our manholes or our, some kind of facility we have out there, a section of sidewalk or something, they've got to accommodate us as well. They can't take up the whole road and not let us maintain our facilities as well if we need to get in there to do something. So that's what that refers to there. And then this is another important section of the code as well. It talking about the coordination of excavations. So the large utility providers, what they'll do is they'll give us like Excel and CenturyLink and stuff. We try to meet with them once a year, and they'll kind of give us an outline of everywhere they want to dig holes and what they want to do, so we can kind of plan our street maintenance work around that. We want to make sure that they're not going to be planning to dig up a street that we just paved recently. We try to make sure we're talking to those guys and making sure we're not wasting money paving something that's going to require a new gas main or something right after we're done. So we not only coordinate with the utility providers, the phone and gas and electric, but also our own internal utilities department. We talk to the water and wastewater department about any kind of main replacement needs they have. I mean, that's even worse if the city can't talk to each other and make sure we don't, I didn't know you guys were doing that tomorrow. What are you doing? We have those meetings to make sure that doesn't happen, because that's the worst. We don't want to be digging up our own street right after we paved it. That doesn't work well for anybody. So we definitely coordinate that and make sure we don't have too many of those issues where we're having to do that too often. So. And let's see, I guess the next slide here is this minimizing impacts of the work. This just refers to more the when they can work in the right of way, and it kind of refers to that other section about the inconvenience and annoyance. That I think the code actually does say inconvenience and annoyance to the public, so they can't annoy us as well. They're not allowed to annoy us, so it's always good. But the work hours are. You can't work between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless the city manager gives approval or if there's an emergency. So, and then the other items this section refers to is they need to keep the street clean, right? They can't have their trash all over. They can't be spilling oil from their equipment and stuff all over the sidewalk and the asphalt. We try to make sure that doesn't happen, and we try to make sure they clean the mud and dust and dirt off the street every day so they don't leave a big mess out there that's causing dust and tracking mud all over the place. So we try to do all that, and then we make sure they protect any trees and landscape and that kind of thing. And then the biggest thing too, I think, is the safe and unobstructed pedestrian walkway maintained around the work site. We have a lot of contractors who don't think about that sometimes, and they'll close the sidewalk and not have a detour plan. You know, they'll think, well, I have a plan for where the cars are going to go. Well, what if somebody wants to walk through here? What's going to happen? You know, so we require that they have a detour plan for that as well. You know, where you need to, if you need to cross over at the corner up the street or whatever, we put signage out to make sure that that's clear for people, that they don't walk up to a construction site and then try to figure out how to walk around all the equipment and everything. So we try to make sure that's all signed and put out there correctly so people know where to walk and be safe out there and not get trapped up by the construction activity. So then this standards for repair and construction here, this is more just refers to the kind of the restoration standards mostly for those excavation type permits. When they dig a hole in the street, we have a certain requirement for the backfill and the surface patching material, the type of asphalt, the type of concrete you need to use and that kind of thing to make sure that they restore it to a quality level with the quality material. So basically the code refers to they need to put it back better than they found it. Basically, right? We require that you've got to at least put it back to equal to what we had before, if not better. We don't want them to leave us with anything worse, which goes back to kind of the city doesn't want to have to pay for, that degradation, that accelerated degradation that is caused by any construction work. So this helps a little bit with that they're allowed to, or they're required to, repair anything that they break and not leave us in any worse condition. So, and then this next one is, goes back to if there is an issue on a newly paved street, if somebody wants to dig a hole in a newly paved street, we do, there is a 2-year moratorium we require. We try not to issue any permits on a street that's been paved within 2 years. We keep track of that. We have a map of that our permit technician has that and knows that these streets are not allowed to have a cut on them because we just paved them within 2 years. But there are certain times where we have to make an exception for an emergency or something, and we do. There's certain criteria here as well that we require. If CenturyLink or somebody comes in and wants to trench down a street that we just paved, we have them show these 3 different criteria here in italics here that have them show us that they can't do it by a trenchless method and that they've looked at alternate alignments, that there's no other place to go but in this newly paved road, and then that the work can't be reasonably delayed. There's a urgent need to repair the phone system or the gas main or something. So there is a pretty strict regimen we go through to make sure they prove that there's no other alternative but to cut up our new streets. So it doesn't happen very often with our coordination meetings and stuff. We don't have this come along too often, but there are provisions because we know emergencies happen. If there's a gas leak or something, you have to dig up the road, right? You can't say, well, it's a newly paved road, just let it leak for 2 years. We can't do that, so we do have to allow it occasionally, but we try to discourage it as much as we can anyway. So then this next slide, relocation of facilities. So this is, let me see here what I have on this. So basically what this does is, this is kind of an engineer's best friend, I like to call it here, that it's one of those things that really gives the city a lot of power. If as I mentioned before, we do review all the permits to make sure that the private utility companies aren't putting their facilities in the way of public facilities and all of our different public utilities and sidewalks and streets. But occasionally there's times where, if we're going to widen out the road or widen out the sidewalk or something, we do have to have them move their stuff out of the way to accommodate that. And this is what gives us that right to do that. We can't ask them to move their stuff out of our way at no charge for a city purpose, or this actually came into play on the Acoma storm sewer project we just completed. There was a gas main that was in conflict with the new pipe that we had to ask Excel to move it out of the way. It was, Excel always kind of balks at it when you first call them, and then you have to show them the franchise agreement that says you are required to move if we have to put our big storm sewer pipe here, and they complied and they came out and moved it at no charge, so it worked. And they don't like it, but it is a rule, and we try not to invoke this too often, because it is a pretty strong, move it over there, no, move it over there. We try to, not take advantage of this rule, and that's why we try when they first put in the facilities to make sure that they put them in a place that we don't think we're ever going to need to put any public utilities or anything like that, because it's a big ask, but it is, once again, a power the city has to control the right-of-way, to make sure that we control what goes where, and we have the first right of refusal for any space in the right-of-way. So it's definitely a very powerful clause we have in the city code that allows us to maintain that control. And then emergency procedures. So there are times, a contractor will need to get into a street after hours on the weekend or a holiday or something, and we're not around to issue a permit right away. So there is a clause in the city code that allows them to go ahead and do the work. They notify us by phone typically. We try to at least be aware of it, but there are times we have to allow them to do the work, because if there is a leaking gas main or something, it's an emergency. We don't want that to turn into something more dangerous. So we understand they have to get out there and fix that immediately, or the water main breaks and things like that. Obviously, you gotta get in there and take care of those things. They're just gonna, they're gonna get worse if you don't take care of them immediately. So we do allow that, but the contractor has to come in and get the permit within 3 days. 3 working days is what the city code requires on that. And then also the reporting of any damage to any underground facility. That's another kind of important clause. Get somebody who digs a hole in the street and doesn't always, if they accidentally hit another utility, we require them to report that damage, because we don't want them to accidentally hit a gas main and bury it and then realize later that, you guys, why is this gas main leaking? We want to make sure they're reporting that right away so we can contact Excel or whoever to make sure the repairs get done. So then this next section here, the revocation of permits and stop work order. So this is this doesn't happen too often either. This is obviously something we don't like to do this too often and have to invoke this clause. But this is kind of what happened on the 5G tower there, where we had the pole base go in, and the contractor did not have a permit. The contractor on that, actually, that was AT&T, is who had the license, the master license agreement that City Attorney Niles spoke about. They had that license, but they did not have the supplemental agreement to show where they wanted to put their antenna. There's a supplemental agreement that goes along for each location which allows us to then look at where they're going to put those and approve it. And those guys just went down there and just punched their base in there and just thought because they had that license they could just put a pole wherever they wanted in the city. And we had to explain to them and show them the agreement that this is what you agreed to and this is not what you have done. So that base has been removed. It's gone. The process worked. We put the stop work order on them. We told them this is not an allowable location, and they have since removed that base, and they're going to actually. We still, as we've mentioned before, I think we still have to allow them to install those antennas in the right-of-way. That's a federal regulation. We have to allow the 5G service. But what they're going to do, they're going to install that antenna on an existing pole down in that area. As you're aware, I'm sure Englewood's got a ton of power poles and utility poles around. There's plenty of options for them. So they actually looked at 2 or 3 sites, and they've settled on one. I think they're going to put it on an existing pole, so it'll be much less intrusive and not be the big eyesore that one was going to be that those guys put in. So it was, like I say, that doesn't happen too often, but it was good to know that we had that rule in place and we were able to enforce it. And they removed the base and didn't complain or anything like that. And they're relocating it to a more suitable location. So it did work. It did work well in that case, and it does work in the future too. That's why that rule is there, that we can, if somebody's doing something without approval or a permit, we do stop the work and make sure that they follow the right regulations and things. So, and then this next, I think these last couple slides here, really just more miscellaneous provisions, just to kind of show how many different requirements and things there are for different uses of the public right-of-way. So this first one talks about, there's a section about when they abandon or remove facilities in the right-of-way, what happens there and how they they can't just leave their abandoned pipes all over the place for us to clean up later. If you're going to not use the facility, we take it out and we don't leave it in the ground for somebody to find later and wonder if it's still working or not. A lot of times if you just find a pipe in the ground, you don't always know if it's still active or not. So it's there's rules about that. And then the contractor license suspension and different, I guess the biggest thing on this, the miscellaneous provisions, this is number 25 there is that's the Public Works Engineering Design and Construction Standards and Specifications Manual. That's a 300-page document that was approved by City Council back in 2020. That really is kind of, I call it almost the Bible of all the rules for constructing things in the right-of-way, all the types of concrete and the types of backfill and the compaction standards and that kind of thing. It's all contained in that manual. So that really does get into those details about how construction is required to be done in the public right-of-way. So and then there's also even a section about news racks in the right-of-way and how those need to be placed and where. So there's definitely a very comprehensive set of rules for these things. And then this last slide is once again just some more miscellaneous types of things as far as signage in the right-of-way, and even a section about the city ditch, and just different things about what can be done, and the different plantings in the right-of-way, and when you can park an RV in the right-of-way. And the last one there is talks about the right-of-way encroachments. So we do occasionally will allow, if a business wants to put an awning that sticks out over the sidewalk or something, we'll consider those. And if they're not going to be in the way of the city's use of the right-of-way, what we typically do, we allow an encroachment agreement on those. And those encroachment agreements they're revocable at any time. So they're basically, you can have it there as long as it's not in the way of the city's use of the right-of-way, basically. So they're very, we can revoke those at any time. So, and there's also certain times where fences are pushed out a little further into the city right-of-way up against the sidewalk. And those are, as long as they're not blocking sight distance at a corner or something, there are times where we allow those. But they're still, once again, revocable. If the city ever wants to use that space or widen out the sidewalk or the road, we're allowed to use the right-of-way to the way we see fit. So that we're covered in that as well. So I think that's everything we've got here. So hopefully this was a good summary of all the different rules and regulations in the city code that governs this work and allows us to regulate and maintain control of the right-of-way. So with that, I think we'll answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Deputy Director Hose and City Attorney Niles. Anything you want to add, City Attorney Niles, before I open up to questions? No?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Perfect. Mayor Pro Tem Ward, you're first.
A couple of questions. First of all, on the section regarding minimizing impact to the public, it looks to me like there's a conflict between the hours of work specified there, which are prohibited 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the hours listed in the city's noise ordinance 6-2-5-E, which prohibits any construction activity between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. So that's concerning to me as someone who's a stickler for noise in my neighborhood, specific to work being done. I think there's room to clear that up and fix those hours. I understand the necessity for emergency work on occasion, but I'd like to see our code in harmony and us making the same standards across the board. And secondly, one of the questions that's popped up recently is if I or another resident is driving down Broadway, for instance, and we notice that a lane is closed on Broadway, that's obviously a right-of-way permit issue of some sort. But the question is, how do we know who is responsible for that and whether or not that's a legal closure? So I assume that our police officers, for instance, are frequently traveling through the city, and they may see a coil of fiber optic cable laying in the road on Tough Street. How do they know if that's supposed to be there or if that's something that they should be issuing a summons for?
So in situations like that, that's where it kind of comes into play, where the other city employees will call our construction inspectors to verify that there's a permit for that activity. A lot of times you can, it's kind of obvious if somebody doesn't have a permit because they're not really following the rules at all. If they have a piece of equipment in the middle of the street with no signage or anything, it's a pretty clear indication that there's probably somebody trying to get away with something there. And the police, as well as the utilities department and our streets operators and stuff that are driving around, they'll usually flag those and give us a call and say, hey, you might want to go check this out. A lot of times we'll get people digging in the alleys, thinking that, I think a lot of people don't realize that the alleys are public right-of-way as well, so we'll have to go explain to them that this is city-owned property and you are required to have a permit. So that's where we have those eyes of the employees that are around all day, including the police as well, to give us a call, and they're aware of who to call on that. And the communication system works pretty well, and we're usually able to catch those guys pretty readily, and we don't have too many people getting away with that as far as we're aware of.
I think that brings up another similar question, if I may, and that is ultimately who is responsible for addressing the issue if there is an illegal encroachment on the right of way? Is it Public Works? Is it the police department? Is it code enforcement? Who has the responsibility to make sure that's addressed?
So typically, Public Works will do those stop orders if there's an issue. And then if we do have a contractor or something who maybe isn't complying or listening to us, we may need to go to code enforcement or get an officer out there to enforce the city code on them, to make sure that they do that, because the Public Works technically doesn't write tickets or anything. We reference the city code to them and say, per city code, you are required to stop work and do this. And so if we do have somebody that's really, disobeying and not listening, we will obviously bring in the police as we need to issue a ticket if we need to, or code enforcement to make sure that they are ticketed for not complying with city code, just like any other city code rule.
Great, thank you.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I noticed this is just an information only item, but you did bring up the issue with making cuts in the pavement, potentially causing longer term problems, and that some cities do have a fee for that. Is that something that that would be a useful thing to add to our code sometime down the line, or has that been considered?
Yeah, so that is something we do definitely recommend having something like that. That is very important, I think, to cover those costs, because they can add up quite a bit. I mean, the more holes you get in a street, the faster it degrades. The issue is you put the hole in the street and then it causes a cold joint or a crack in the road, and that lets water into the subgrade. And once water gets in your subgrade and freezes and thaws, it expands and contracts, and that's kind of how potholes start. When you have those cracks in the asphalt, and it spreads and spreads. So that is something we do recommend, and we are going to study that and then kind of look at how the other cities take that on, and then come back with a recommendation for that fee. That's a fee that we're definitely looking at trying to implement for next year as part of the fee schedule, and have that. Some cities have it. It's kind of by the foot of trench you dig in the street, or the square footage of the hole you dig, and that kind of thing. So we need to kind of flesh that out a little bit and figure out what makes sense and what the right fee would be to make sure we can justify the cost to the city, so we don't get any complaints about it's just a exorbitant fee for nothing. We want to be able to justify based on this is the cost to replace the street based on the damage you've done. So that's those are the things we need to look at and get some details on, and come back to you with a recommendation on that.
So was that the only thing? That's the only thing I heard you say that that maybe we could update in our code to kind of bring it up to standards of some things. Is that the only thing you saw in the code that needed updating potentially?
That's correct. That's the only thing I noticed that was not really a fee that that a lot of other cities have. That's one thing that stood out to me, that something that most cities have adopted now and that they use for that purpose, because it is a cost to the public when they do that. So the other fees are all, we do look at those each year and make sure that they're comparable to other cities. It's a little unique the way Englewood has the kind of the by the hour fee, which is actually even more exact fee type of thing. It's not just a lump sum, no matter what kind of permit, it costs you $100. It's based on the hours it takes us to review. Sometimes the guys will come in with they want to put a utility down 2 different city street blocks or something. That takes a while to look at and kind of see where the city facilities are and make sure they're not putting it somewhere that's going to be right in our way. So we do charge by the hour to look at that and make sure that they're not kind of impeding the city's ability to use the right of way. So I think our fee structure is pretty strong in that respect, that we do recover the cost for the administrative process for the permits.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Member Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much, Mr. Hose, especially for repeating that middle section. On your slide entitled 11-719, the title is Standards for Newly Constructed Streets. My PDF says it's page 23. I don't think this needs to turn into I don't think this needs to be a council request formally. I'm just wondering if, in your experience, you have a general idea as to what percentage of the time exceptions do arise of these 3 bullets, for example, that require your open trenching or potholing within that 2-year time frame. It just seems it could be extremely costly if it was happening more often than not. And I'm wondering if you have an idea of the prevalence of that.
So it's a little hard to predict that there. Most of the times what happens on those, it's due to a water main break or a gas leak or something like that. And we don't know how many of those we're going to get or when they're going to happen. So usually the only time we have those types of issues is when it's an emergency. We don't come across that too often where somebody comes in a few months after we just paved a road and, hey, I'd like to dig a trench all the way down here. We try to, those coordination meetings do help to make sure that we make sure everybody knows these are the streets we're going to pave. Let us know if you have anything to do in these streets before we pave it. So we make sure we catch that before we have those issues later on. But it's mostly the emergency stuff to where that'll catch us. And we just, like I said, it's kind of Murphy's Law sometimes. The water main will break right after we pave the street. And what are the odds that this thing breaks now after being here for 30 years? Now all of a sudden it decides to break. So it happens, but it's not real often. But that's usually the times that it does happen is because of an unforeseen leak or something.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you so much, Mr. Host. Thank you, Mayor.
Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, City Attorney Niles and Mr. Hoos. I appreciate the presentation. One of my questions, I remember seeing somewhere in here that we were going to visit, I think it may have been fees later on in the year. And I know that recreational vehicles can be parked on the street for 72 hours for loading and unloading. We don't currently require permits for that, do we?
It's not something Public Works issues. No, we do require the permit for if somebody puts a dumpster or one of those pods out on the street. It's an occupancy permit for that. But RVs, we do not. Public Works does not issue a permit for those. That's not something that comes to public. I'm not aware that if there is a permit issued for that or not.
Okay, and we're not really intending to do that either, are we?
No, that's not an intent. That would be very time consuming and very a lot of work there to do that. So we do sometimes, really the way we catch a lot of those is we have now that we have the citywide street sweeping where they sweep curb to curb, we catch a lot of those vehicles that are sitting on the street too long and get people to move them off the street. A lot of times we'll catch abandoned vehicles or things that don't run, and we tell people you need to get it off the street anyway. So it's kind of a dual purpose there. When we do that sweeping, we catch a lot of those vehicles that people try to leave out on the street for an extended time.
Right, and I appreciate that. I mean, I had a constituent call me one time. There was a trailer that had been parked out there for a few months, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Member Russell. I have a question, and I think this might be for the city attorney. So, city attorney, when we talk about the process, as long as, from what it sounds like, as long as they happen to have the right licensing, the right insurance, it sounds like we do approve a lot of these permits. So I'm just wondering, in the case of whether it's phone, electric, gas, do we ever decline the permit or don't allow the permit in any kind of cases? Or as long as they have that and it's a true use of the right-of-way, do we basically just approve those permits?
Actually, that's a decision for the Public Works Department. It comes to me when they are ready to sign the contract and negotiate it.
So yeah, what that really comes down to is once they're granted a license to put their facility in the right of way, we are pretty much obligated to allow them to put it in. We still have the control over where they put it, but it really comes down to that license agreement. And we, as far as the like the 5G and stuff, we're required to let them share the right of way. So we have to accommodate that kind of thing. So it's and like the Excel and Comcast and stuff, they have those franchise agreements with the city that basically allow them to operate their facilities in the right of way. So we do pretty much have to honor those agreements anytime they want to install, facilities. We control where. We just we can't say no once we've given them that license agreement or that franchise agreement.
And Deputy Director, are you able to elaborate on that? Because it came up a lot during the 5G conversations in terms of, and I guess it goes to kind of like the 11.715 portion of the code where, the minimal inconvenience of it. Obviously, a lot of citizens have or see it as an inconvenience of having a 5G tower or any type of telecommunications in their property. So, what kind of recourse do citizens have? where, basically, like, what is the city stating to them in terms of where they can put this, some of this infrastructure?
So on those types of things, we do reach out to citizens now. That's part of the new master license agreement. There's a notification process. We try to get neighborhood consensus and make them aware of what's happening there. There are certain locations those antennas have to go. There's like a certain spacing and stuff that they've got to do a grid there that we've got to kind of accommodate that. And that's why we try to use the existing poles as much as we can, just so there's no new poles or infrastructure in the right of way. But the way the code's written, it's more we try to minimize the inconvenience. We can't eliminate it. There's always going to be, it's got to go somewhere, right? We can't, put the tower in the middle of the air. It's got to go on a pole somewhere. So there's going to be an inconvenience to some more than others. But we try to find a place like that one on Galapago there. We knew that location they'd chosen was not a suitable location. Obviously, the resident was upset as well, and we totally agreed that was not appropriate. And that was because we hadn't looked at it and realized, that's why we review those permits to make sure they're in a good spot. Or if there is going to be a potentially controversial spot, we'll reach out to the neighborhood or the residents to say, hey, this is something that CenturyLink or AT&T is looking at needing to do here, and this is kind of explain more about the why, so they're not surprised by that, I think, is what we try to do to make sure they understand that this is where it needs to go and why, and the kind of the way the city code is written to accommodate these types of facilities.
Thank you, Deputy Director. I have a couple more questions, but I'll let Mayor Pro Tem Ward go first and then Member Russell. Mayor Pro Tem?
Relative to fees, how much discretion does the city have? If we wanted to encourage or discourage certain activities based on perhaps the fee that we set, are we able to do that? Like, we're required to allow this, but we'll allow it for $10,000 instead of $100,000, for instance.
I would want to research some specific uses. For example, telecommunications is a bit of a different animal, so I would want to research that specifically. But generally, you do have discretion to set your fees. So you could certainly set policy in that type of manner. But again, I would want to research specifically.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Russell?
Thank you. So my question is really around 5G. I know there's a lot of health concerns and people have a lot of health concerns about 5G towers. Is there any way, I'm not saying we should eliminate them from the city, but is there a way to get minimal impact in residential areas?
So from what I understand, I think there's actually something in the ordinance or the item that was passed by City Council that speaks to that there was some kind of a statement about it. It doesn't cause any side effects or any issues to the public there. It was kind of a disclaimer almost, it made it sound like to me. So that's, I do know there's a certain spacing those antennas have to have. That 5G, that's how they're able to get the speed higher, is because it bounces between antennas a lot faster. The signal can repeat or however that works. So that's, as far as the health thing, I'm not, I think that goes more into the federal regulation that requires us to accommodate the 5G service in public right-of-way. I'm not real versed in that. I can't answer that too specifically, but that's about as much as I know on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Just to follow up in terms of like the communication with the public, if something's going in, again, just trying to go back to whether or not citizens have any say in terms of just vetoing whether some infrastructure is going in. And just to be clear, I don't have any of the concerns in terms of like health concerns about the 5G. I think it has more to do with the fact of line of sight. Maybe people do have health concerns about that aspect of it, but I'm just more what can the public say in terms of what goes on the right of way within their property or in the view of their property?
So yeah, I think if there is something we see that's going to impact a certain property more than another, we certainly reach out to that property and talk to them about kind of help make them part of the decision and help us figure out what is most appropriate. We can't necessarily say no, it can't go anywhere, it's got to go somewhere, but if there is a certain troublesome location or a problem area that we feel is this is going to be kind of close to this person's driveway or something like that, we'll reach out and talk to them, because once again, we don't want any surprises where somebody comes home from work one day and there's a giant phone box in the middle of their, sidewalk or something. We try to, that's why we try to make sure those facilities get located kind of in a more of a neutral area, away from any kind of major activity, that they're not really impacting one person more than another, but we do request that feedback to help make that decision when necessary, to be able to, like I say, to make sure that the public is part of the decision-making process for us, and we're not deciding for them if there is something that we feel is going to impact them.
And my last question before I pass it over to Member Woodward, are citizens able to opt in or opt out in any type of utilities being placed near their property or on the right-of-way outside of the property?
Are you talking like as far as not take the service or whatever, not have the service?
No, in terms of just any type of infrastructure going in outside of their, like within the right of way, are they able to state to us, based on your previous answer, it sounds like no, but citizens have asked whether or not that they could just be removed from any 5G towers going in front of their property.
No, that's something that we can't allow. That goes back to the federal regulation that we have to allow that system in the city. That's a federal communications regulation, that 5G is something we have to accommodate. And I don't think we can isolate it to certain areas of the city. It's got to cover all of the public right of way, not just Englewood, but any public entity. I think that's a rule that they have to accommodate that network. So it wouldn't be something that we could exclude it from a certain area.
Thank you. Member Woodward?
Yeah, both of the complaints we had were from citizens, homeowners, long-term homeowners, that, as I understand it, didn't receive any type of notice that this was going to happen. All of a sudden, there was construction going on in their front yards. And I'm wondering, and I didn't see anything in the agreement or the license that was provided, which I thought really protected the city very well. But I'm wondering if we can't add something more in our residential areas. I mean, we're talking, what is it, an 18-inch setback from the sidewalk or something like that for that right-of-way?
Yeah, it's 18 inches to 2 feet roughly.
Well, some sort of notice with a diagram or something like that to a homeowner and get their buy-in. I mean, the homeowner may say, I have very expensive landscaping or plants or something right there. Can we move it 8 feet that way or something like that? And, going through the whole license agreement, I really didn't see, or I saw very, very, very little addressing the public or our citizens as far as their lack of rights. And I mean that in that it is a right-of-way, so there is a lack of rights there for them. But as a courtesy, I think there's certain things we can do, and I'm just wondering if we can get that into this license agreements where there's, notice and working with the homeowner for the CenturyLinks of the world and the AT&Ts.
Sure. So in the new master license agreement that City Attorney Niles drafted, we do have a clause in there about notifying the public and making sure there aren't any surprises, because that was something that was missing from the previous license agreement. That was the part of the update, was to get that notification in there. So we do have that now, and as we review the permits and stuff, staff is aware of those things. The issue with the one where the person wasn't notified was because basically we weren't notified, and that contractor went out there and did that.
Understood.
And if we don't know, then we can't notify the homeowner. So, and that was another thing we talked to them about. This is why we review these things before you put them in, so we make sure that the affected people know about them and there's no surprises. And as your suggestion said, there's oftentimes you can talk to a property owner, and if you move it 8 feet away or something, it's going to work much better. It's just kind of a collaborative way of finding a good spot for these types of facilities in the right of way, that everybody has a little say and buy-in into it to make sure it works for everyone.
Yep. And the other item, the last item I have is, there's certainly one of those homeowners that complained profusely about cleanup and coming back and getting this stuff done. And I think ultimately the city sent somebody down there to help clean it up, or I think it was Sean and a police officer that ended up just picking up some stuff. But I'm wondering if we can expand that. Obviously, they can't work in an 18-inch area if they're putting something, and they're going to probably have to get onto the property of the homeowner, in addition to the sidewalk area, which it would be a right-of-way, but to make sure that they're cleaning it up, returning it to its former state.
So that is part of what our construction inspectors check, and we do, technically we don't allow them to work outside of the right-of-way on the private property. I think a lot of property owners assume that they own up to the back of the sidewalk there and don't always realize there's a little strip behind the sidewalk that is still public right-of-way, even though they maintain the landscaping in there. But we do try to keep them out of the actual private property. We don't want them up in the middle of somebody's front yard or something. And we do our best with the construction inspectors to make sure they clean up as well. That's definitely a challenge, when you're digging a hole in the street or something, you got dirt all over it. It's a lot of work, but we do, pretty much that's a daily thing. We make sure they keep it clean. And the biggest reason for that is to keep all the dirt and stuff out of our storm sewer system. I mean, a lot of that dirt's on the street and they don't clean it, then it washes right down into the storm sewer, and then who pays for that? The city pays for that. So we make sure that stays out of there so we don't have to clean that out. So that is something we are vigilant about tracking and making sure that is occurring there. And it is a challenge, though. That is something, getting people to clean up is, they're kind of done with the work. They want to get out of there. So we do have, we push them and make sure they don't leave before they clean up. And that's obviously something, if somebody's really, obstinate about not doing it, that's something we can, threaten to call on their letter of credit or their bond to say, we're going to call somebody out here to clean up your mess because you haven't put the right-of-way back to the existing conditions. So we do have ways that we can ensure compliance with that.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. It was really helpful for me, and I appreciated how much thoughtfulness I heard on how we're stewarding taxpayer assets, which I think is incredibly important. I have a couple of questions. I know you mentioned that if a contractor would move forward without a permit, that the penalty would be to have to pay the permit fee twice. And you mentioned that is kind of a deterrent, if you will. Obviously, we saw it did not deter everyone. Are there any additional deterrents that you think would be needed or that you would recommend?
That's an interesting question. I think it does go back to the financial. I mean, some of these big companies, even a double permit fee is another $400 to them. It's a drop in the bucket. They're not going to really, be too worried about that. But it is something we have, and we try to be reasonable with that. And we can certainly. I think it goes back to the financial is really what gets people's attention on that kind of thing. So it may be something to consider with the fee schedule and stuff. That there is a little more of a deterrent there to get their attention a little bit more. That's certainly something that could be considered in that. But it's mostly the way to get compliance is by charging people more, and then the financial seems to be the motivation on that kind of stuff. So
I appreciate that. I do see this has caused some problems in our community and would love to see it deterred stronger in the future. I also have a question going to some of the mayor's questions about the notification to citizens, but also maybe the ability for them to have any kind of recourse or kind of communicate about their feelings about the project. Do you have any sense of where Inglewood compares to other municipalities as far as the opportunities for citizens to voice concern about these kinds of projects? Are we in line with other nearby municipalities? I know that's somewhat of an unfair question to ask you on the spot.
I guess I'll just speak from my experience. I mean, a lot of times cities don't listen too much. They'll do what they want to do. And in my experience, Englewood is one of the better cities at engaging the citizens and talking to them about, what's going to happen and why. And the biggest thing is that why. People understand that this is why it has to go here for the overall system, functionality or whatever. So we do try to engage citizens with that, because it does come down to that I keep repeating it, that surprise factor. We don't want somebody to come home from work and see this giant tower in their yard or a phone box or something. So we do try to engage where we can. And I know a lot of places, the government never calls you back, whatever, and the city just does whatever they want. But in my experience from working at Englewood, I really appreciate the culture here, and that we do try to talk to the citizens and make sure they understand what's happening, and make them part of the solution. If there is something we have to do that we know is going to be a little problematic for them, we try to help them. And like Councilmember Woodward said, sometimes you can talk to the resident, and if you move it 5 feet away, they're happy as they can be, and that having that conversation just solves so many things. And that's a lot of how we do some of our projects and stuff too, when we have to put storm sewers and things in, that we try to engage the residents and say, is this a corner you use? And a lot of times when we replace the ADA ramps on the corners, we'll have to talk to the residents about, some of the old ramps in the city are very small and they don't meet the standards of the current day. So we have to talk to them about, in order to make this ramp bigger, we're going to have to move some of your landscaping. Is there a certain way you'd like it done? And we try to work with them to put it back, in a manner that they're happy with, so they don't have to hire a landscaper or something to restore something after the city's put a new ramp in. We try to make them happy with the altered landscape that's out there. So it's definitely something I think we are one of the better cities at doing that, and then making sure that citizens understand what we're doing and are part of the solution.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
Getting to what Member Neunenkamp was talking about previously, the subject of sort of having a bigger stick for enforcement on these things. If we're requiring licensing of contractors, I wonder if we could consider suspension of licensing or advising the actual contracting entity that they cannot use that contractor for the project if they want it to go forward.
So that is actually something in the city code. I'm not sure it came up in the presentation here, but that is something, we have done that before, where we will not allow permits for certain contractors who don't follow our rules, or who don't clean up after themselves, or break our stuff and leave without fixing it. We do have that, and a lot of times the contractors, they're subcontractors to a larger company like CenturyLink or Excel, and once it gets back to Excel, that it gets their attention, and they know, if you want to do any more work for Excel, you better take care of what you're doing out here. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to work in Englewood anymore. So we have had a couple of those, or if we do have people that keep trying to work without a permit, this is enough. We stop them, and we make sure they don't continue to repeat that, because that's a drain on staff's time as well, to keep chasing down the same person who doesn't want to follow our rules. So that is a code requirement now, that we can't suspend a license or not issue permits until they come into compliance with our rules.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Member Woodward.
I do have one more, and it may not be public works, it may be utilities. With regard to the city ditch, where it's piped, and storing stuff on top of that, storing materials and debris and stuff, is that permitted?
So typically that would not be permitted, because that impedes the city's ability to dig up the pipe and maintain it. If the pipe were to go to leak or break or something, we don't want, we definitely don't want, a lot of times where there's pipes in backyards and stuff, people will try to put a shed on top of the pipe or something. And we try to avoid that, because if you have your storage shed on our pipe, we're not going to be able to dig it up and fix it very well. So we try to discourage any storage of materials on top of any city pipeline anywhere, just so we have immediate access if we need it.
Okay. Well, I've heard of some of those, follow up and try and get some addresses.
Sure, that's definitely something we would follow up on that, because that does, if there's an emergency or something, when the crews go out there and see somebody's storage shed or a big pile of branches or something on there, it does slow down the response time, and it could create more damage and cause more problems to adjacent properties. So we try to, if there are things like that, something we can certainly follow up on.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, Deputy Director, City Attorney, thank you very much for the conversation and the questions and all the information regarding the right-of-way. City Attorney, you're not done yet. Go ahead.
Before we move on, I did want to follow up on Mayor Pro Tem's first comment about the hours and making them consistent. While we're talking about it, if we are to propose a change, is there hours that you would like to see? 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. prohibited? 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., Something like that?
I think I'm probably going to be the biggest stick in the mud on this, and I prefer 7 to 7. That's my preference. I would like it to be quiet when I get home and quiet before I wake up in the morning. And I think other people in the city also appreciate that.
Anybody else want to chime in, or?
I think for sure that people definitely want 7 a.m. in the morning as the earliest that construction starts. I haven't personally heard many complaints about the evening hours, but the morning hours I have.
Member Noonekamp?
I was just going to see, since we have Deputy Director Hose with us, if he has any thoughts on changing the hours. You're very familiar with these contracts and with these projects. Do you see a concern with changing it from the 6 to 9 that we have, or the 6 to 9 that we have currently?
So typically what I see is the 7 to 7. That's a pretty typical for cities. You know, the 7 is about the earliest you want to get going on a weekday. Most people are up and getting ready to go to work by then. And then 7 p.m. is usually it's starting to get dark and people are coming home from work. You don't want to be working out in the right of way and have people out there. So 7 to 7 is usually a pretty standard overall working hours. We do have limited hours that we allow people to work on our busier streets like Broadway and some of the arterial and collector type streets that I think it's 8:30 to I think 3 or 3:30. I think we restrict that just so when there is traffic coming to and from work that people aren't held up in a traffic jam because there's somebody out there. So we have those hours as far as when you can work on some of the busier roads, but overall 7 to 7 I think is a pretty standard requirement for those types of working hours.
Do you have a sense of why it was 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. originally?
I don't know how that got in the code. Actually, I'm not sure. It is kind of odd there. I'm not aware of too many contractors working at 9 p.m. at night. I've only in my career I've maybe seen 1 or 2 guys trying to finish some concrete work at 9 o'clock at night because they couldn't get concrete any earlier in the day. But it's pretty tough when it's getting dark out there and you're trying to finish. And we don't want guys working in the dark, right? It's not going to get us a quality product. So we try to limit it to the daylight hours. So we make sure they're doing a good job.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Member Russell, you'll get the last word.
Thank you. I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Ward that it's easier to have everything in city code consistent as much as we can. So I agree with 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Thank you very much, Council, for the conversation. Thank you very much, City Attorney, Deputy Director. Really appreciate it. Moving on to our next item on the agenda, information direction for the Communication Plan for Organized Garbage and Recycling Collection Initiative. Public Works Director Maria DeAndre will be present to discuss the consideration of the Outreach and Communication Plan. Good evening, Director.
Good evening. Thank you. I'll call up the presentation here. We'll walk through that quickly and then be able to have a discussion. Thank you. All right, so just wanted to give a very brief overview of our initiative to date. And basically, we started this discussion back in 2019, actually. So originally, ETAC, the Budget Advisory Committee, Keep Englewood Beautiful, and CASE had all mentioned this and were talking about it. And then staff actually took it on as an initiative. And we started with the first RFP that was developed by staff and put that out on the street and got 2 proposals back. In mid-June of 2020, just about the time that we got responses to that RFP, a citizens committee was formed by City Council to be able to weigh in and dig more into the details of this initiative. Since that time, we've met 23 times. 23 individual meetings to talk about trash, if you can believe that. And so we're still going strong with the committee. We're actually meeting again on Wednesday night to look at some more details and talk through some of these same materials. So at that time, though, one of the first actions that the Citizens Committee took was to recommend rejecting those 2 proposals and basically go through and rewrite the RFP, with the goal of really hoping that we could incorporate some different elements, that might work better for Englewood, and then hopefully and potentially reduce costs from what we had seen previously. So some of the advantages really of doing organized collection would be is that we're serving everyone at the same time. So one truck for trash collection, one truck for recycling. We don't have multiple companies going up and down the pavement, up and down alleyways. And ultimately that would result in safer streets just because of the less amount of truck traffic, less wear and tear, and ultimately less noise and emissions as well. Also, hopefully that, again, that competitive bidding process, we get fair pricing. A lot of the comments that we receive is about, oh, I started at such and such a fee, and all of a sudden, about a year later, they're increasing my fee dramatically. What can I do? And it's a free market situation, so the options for homeowners are really to go out and try to shop around and find a better deal. But you don't necessarily pay what your neighbor pays. And even when the Citizens Committee talked with each of the 4 kind of major waste haulers within the city, we said, well, what's your starting price? And the answer was, it depends. So nobody was willing to give away that information. So they really keep that close to their vest. And I think they're doing a lot of shopping as well, hearing what's on the ground, what's being offered in terms of getting them in the door for that initial price. Because as you all know, whether it's cable services or any other kind of option, insurance, you don't tend to shop around very often. Once you get with somebody, you stick with it and you pay that each month or each quarter. So the good part about this would be is that those increases are automatically built in. And then we also have the ability to hopefully have better customer service, one point of contact for customers, and then going back through the utility billing process that you would receive that on your monthly bill. Some of the disadvantages would be is that you don't have a choice anymore. So somebody might have had their provider for 20 years and, we've got Bob who comes and picks up my garbage every day. He returns my carts. He's so great. He waves at the kids, and I don't want to not have Bob anymore. So, or I have a particular, great deal. I don't want to give that up. So that's one of the disadvantages. And to some, having more oversight by the city in this case is actually a negative thing. It's, again, free market. The ability to go out and get the best price for myself is actually, in some people's minds, a very good thing. And ultimately, the hauling companies have less competition. So if we were to contract with just one company, all of a sudden now we're reducing that opportunity for the free market to work and compete. So the intent of our program, as we're moving forward with the base service, would be weekly garbage collection and every other week or bi-weekly recycling collection at everybody's home. Large item disposal, so this is things like furniture, mattresses, bikes, anything that's kind of too big to put into your trash container, and as well as then up to 10 additional bags of garbage and 10 bundles or bags of yard waste, so that might be a bundle of sticks or branches. 2 times per year you would receive a voucher for that where they would come and be able to pick that up. And then also biannual, so twice a year yard waste events, so likely at a park or the service center where you could come and drop off yard waste at no additional cost. Composting was included as an optional service, and you'll see here that we have a question on the survey related to that, where people could opt in to, for an additional cost, do composting for weekly collection at their home. We also included, with a lot of debate, as to whether or not you could opt out of the service. So where we landed was that for the first year, everybody would have to be a part of it, just to get the prices in a reasonable level, be able to give us what would it be price-wise if we did get the greatest amount of efficiency. Then after the first year, we are going to allow households to opt out. But they still would have to show us that they have an alternate service. So they can't just not have garbage. They would need to show us that they have a bill with another provider who would come in and take care of their weekly garbage service. So what we wanted to discuss tonight was specifically, now that we've gotten the 2 proposals back on the second RFP, again, the committee is reviewing those, and we want to now seek input from the public. And so we've drafted a communication and outreach plan to do just that. And so we're looking at various methods of engaging citizens to get their input and educate them more about the program so that we can bring all of that back to City Council and say, okay, here's what we have. These are the prices. What do you think? So this would entail updating our city website, using our Englewood Engaged platform more robustly to get input. Again, there's right now we do have a page under Public Works on the regular city website, but we would also use the Englewood Engaged page to allow for that feedback back and forth. Doing an article in the Citizens magazine that one will show up here in February when you receive your next Citizens magazine, as well as possibly a mailed postcard to everybody, encouraging them to go out, look at the Englewood Engaged page, look at some of the other resources, as well as take the survey. And then possibly we're going to develop another educational video. We have one that's out on the city's website right now that kind of gave an intro to the program. We developed that maybe about 1.5 years ago. And then we would also hold 2 public meetings, one being virtual and one in person, where we would, similar to last time, we did 3 open house meetings back in the fall of 2019, and really just be able to answer questions. So a brief overview and then really open it up to whoever wanted to attend. And then based on the questions we received at those meetings, prepare a frequently asked questions comment sheet to answer those questions and make that available if somebody couldn't attend those meetings. So I'll pause there and just see if there's any questions or comments before we move on to the survey.
Any questions from council? Not at this point. Director, go ahead.
Thank you. All right. So one of the elements that we've discussed was getting citizen input via a survey. So we did take a survey back in early 2019, and we have those results. That was something that was on the city's website there was a link to it. It was actually very well participated in. I think we had over 780 responses on that. So it was really good. This time we're going to use the Polco, our platform, the company who has done other surveys for us. And so we have just a series of questions here, and again, looking for input from the council as to whether or not these should be worded slightly different, if there's other questions that you might like to see. And a lot of these were asked last time, so I'd like to compare the responses we received in 2019 to what we hear from this survey. So how satisfied are you? This was the exact same question that we asked last time. Similarly, what is the current company that you're using to provide service to your property? We had a few more options back then, so right now these are the 3, Republic, Waste Connections, and Waste Management, that are the primary providers within the city. Then how much do you currently pay for service on a monthly basis? We asked this question last time as well. This time I'm giving them a little bit of a range, so we can enter in exactly if you want to go get your bill and divide that up by month, or if you just want to give a range here so that we got all kinds of answers last time, because I think a lot of people responded because they get their bills quarterly. And so they responded quarterly, and we divided that up for them. So we are looking to compare apples to apples in terms of dollars. And then, so this is the range that we're talking about based on the proposals that we received. So it's probably between $27 to $30 per month. And if we knew that the guaranteed maximum increase was about that $4 to $5 over the next 7 years, how amenable would you be to that cost structure and moving towards organized collection? And then just a simple yes or no. This was on the survey last time, would you be supportive of a change to one service provider? Would you be interested in participating in that composting service at an additional cost? And then finally, would you like to see this question placed on a ballot? We did not ask that last time, but I know that's a question that's been tossed around by the council, a little bit by the Citizens Committee, is whether or not, you know, we've taken this as far as we can. Do we put this back out as an initiative that the citizens could actually vote on? So with that, I'll open to any questions or modifications to any of those questions or additions.
Thank you, Director. Member Nudenkamp.
Thank you. I have a question for the survey, question 3 about the monthly rate. In my experience, this varies significantly on whether or not you have recycling included with your trash pickup, and that doesn't seem to be captured anywhere here. And I'm curious, how would we know if someone is paying $18 a month, but for trash only, versus someone who's paying for also recycling? Is there a way we can capture that better in the survey?
Great question, or great comment. Yes. Maybe breaking it down is, maybe the first question is, do you pay for recycling? And then if so, what's your monthly cost? And then if you don't, what's your monthly cost?
Yeah, I think that would be
Great
helpful.
point.
And then I also just noticed this, and you went over it a little quickly in the presentation, that if someone were to opt out after the first year, they would have to prove that they have another trash provider and pay a service fee. Can you speak more to that?
Yes. So the intent, and this is similar to other cities that we've talked to, is there would be a minimum service fee. So we are planning that the cost that you saw there would include an administrative fee for the city of about just under $2 to pay for basically the staff and the resources, the mailings, that sort of thing. So we would not be able to limit those to just the people who participated in the program, but really it would have to be spread over all citizens. So that would be the minimum service fee. However, one of the proposers actually is saying that regardless of the opt-out percentage, that they would only provide service if that their cost was also passed on to each homeowner, which basically averts the whole option of giving people an opt-out. So why would you pay the city and only to then opt out and pay somebody else? So that's one of the ways, and these are some of the nuances where it's not a very black and white, these proposals that we received. Instead, it was some of these caveats and conditions on the proposals that we're working our way through.
That's helpful. And that's $2 a month or annually?
But pardon me?
Was the service fee $2 a month?
Yes, per month.
Thank you.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director DeAndre. The one thing that jumped out at me at the survey is that question of whether people are paying monthly or quarterly. I'm afraid people would just maybe select the dollar amount that's closest, even though they pay quarterly or something to that effect. I was just wondering if we could put in those survey questions in parentheses, that's, $30 a month is $90 quarterly, or something like that. I don't know if that would clarify it so that people would know, oh yeah, do I pay quarterly or monthly, just to make sure that they check the right box.
Yeah, as you saw there, it was pretty exact. So we'd really like people to not just guess and really look at their bill. Okay, so we can list the quarterly cost as well.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
One of the things in life that's always annoyed me personally is being asked my opinion and then having that opinion disregarded. So before we ask question number 7, I think we need to ensure that we are able and willing to put a question on the ballot. So that may just be weighing in on that tonight or weighing in on it individually. I'm fine with it going to the ballot, but it doesn't comport with the timeline that is in this report. If we're engaging in a contract in June, we can't ask the question in November. So we would have to decide if we're going to call a special election to ask the question, or if we're going to delay the contract, or if that's even possible.
Yes, I think the intent would be as if let's say we brought all this information and there was an high percentage of people who wanted to put it on the ballot, and that's the way the council decided to go, is we would not pursue a contract, but instead would potentially pursue the ballot option. So I don't think we would go down those paths, dual paths at the same time. It'd be one or the other.
Okay, thanks for the clarification on that.
Member Woodward.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I'm hearing quarterly and monthly payments. I pay annually. And I'm expecting that in paying annually that I'm paying less because I'm paying in advance. Although I question whether I'm doing that nowadays. And so I'm interested in seeing that. The guaranteed maximum increase, $4 to $5 annually, just not monthly, but annually.
Over the life of the 7-year contract. Because we've, if you recall, we've limited it to the lesser of either 3% annual increase, or it's the lesser of the consumer price index, or 3%. So if you add, so assuming 3% is the max, 3% per year on top of those prices, you'd get, for a 7-year, you'd get no more than $4 to $5 increase.
It seems like it'd be over a 7-year period higher than that. I mean, that's great if you got it.
And we have provided those, and we can bring those back to the council too, but we have provided those yearly estimates to the Citizens Committee, and I can, they are not in your packet, but I can bring those back or provide those via council request tracker.
Okay.
To see exactly what those prices would be.
So when it says 27 to 30, is that just for the trash, or does that include the recycling also?
That's the complete base service. So the weekly garbage, biweekly recycling, and then the large item pickup and the waste, the yard waste events.
Okay. And how about trash cans then?
Yes. So if we went in this direction, each property would be provided with one trash can and one recycling can.
Like the 94 gallon or something?
We have two options, so we've made it really difficult. So
It's
we're either exploring like two different sizes for the garbage and recycling, where it's a 32 or a 96, or just doing 96 across the board.
Yeah.
So we're still debating those options as well.
Okay. Being a senior, and I think representing seniors here, some of us are maybe living by ourselves in a home, or maybe there's two of us. We don't generate much trash. I can speak for myself when I'm living alone, and that's not always, that's sometimes. I won't put the trash out for a couple weeks because there isn't enough to justify putting it in a can or letting the bag blow down the street. So it's just, I don't know if you've asked that question.
We have heard that quite a bit. So whether it's smaller families, single people, that's why we're looking at that what we call the pay as you throw. So having the two different size cans, one being the 32 gallon versus the 96, which is 3 times as large, really gives those homeowners more options to have a smaller can, pay a lesser price, and then be able to use that on a more frequent basis than the very large can just across the board for every household. Okay. So we are still considering that.
And would there be just one pickup day per week, or would we split up the city into 2 different days or something like that?
Yes, most likely. So we are requiring that if we move forward, the hauler would have to provide us with a schedule and a map. So it may be 2 or 3 days, but it would not. We probably could not service the entire city on one single day in a given week. Probably be spread over a couple of days.
Okay. And with the bundled bags of yard waste, I know some people, they bag it weekly and put it out, either put it in their trash dumpster or put it out, the bag out. Does that mean that here, large item disposal up to 3, or let's see, bags and 10 bundled bags of yard waste, is that 10 bundled bags per year?
So you would only, the efficiency of the program works because they will come and just take what's in your can. You can't put anything outside of the can. But twice a year, you would receive the opportunity, what we're calling the voucher program, to call up the waste hauler and come out to your house and pick up large items, up to 3 of those furniture items plus 10 bags or bundles of yard waste or just regular garbage. So you would need to make that phone call, and that's the downside. So it wouldn't be when you want to set out the trash at your trash can, you'd have to make an appointment. They'd come and pick it up on that probably within the next week or so.
Okay, great. Good, thank you.
Member Russell.
Thank you. So I think you've kind of answered my question in your last thing. So if you opt for the bigger trash removal, you'll get a 96-gallon can, and that's all the trash that you can put out in a week. I'm going to be real honest with you. In the summertime, we probably generate, well, maybe not so much in the summertime because we have our lawn mowed. Okay, so that's taken care of. But we have a lot of big trees. And I guarantee you that at least once a week during leaf falling, we would generate 20 bags of leaves. And I stuck them beside the house because we're allowed 5 bags in addition to the trash can. In the wintertime, the 96-gallon can probably isn't even half full. So I'd like to know what the cities around us are doing, because I already know that when Sheridan went to single hauler trash, a lot of the people are paying for 2 trash haulers. They're paying for what Sheridan is requiring, and then they're paying to hire an extra trash hauler to haul their trash away. And I have a huge problem with that.
Director, did you want to respond or just take another comment?
Yeah, I have not reached out to Sheridan, but I certainly will. So they were not one of the companies listed as one of the references, but being so close to us, I will certainly reach out to them.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions a citizen had asked me about how this contract is going to work. Is this set up to where the citizens would be required to put their trash can in a specific place? It could be, mechanically lifted into the thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about this. So the way that the RFP was written is that you could opt to go either in the alley or in the curbside out front of your house. So again, the caveats on one of the proposals was that they would only service if you were in the alley, if you were already getting alley service. So that's, again, something we're working through, talking through. But the intent would be is that you as the homeowner would have the choice to either put it at the alley or the curb, regardless of how it's being collected right now.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Actually, I'll ask some questions before I pass it back over to you, Member Woodward. So on the second part of the survey, or the second set of questions, that first question kind of talks to the 27 to 30. And one of the comments I wanted to make was that it probably should state there with recycling as well. Would our draft language look like that if this were to go to the voters? Would it state, if you were, whatever legalese needs to go in there, but would it give a range of 27 to 30 or what would that look like? Because obviously we may have more information than voters may have if we were to go to a single hauler.
Yeah, I think at that point, I think that it would be a yes or no question in the ballot. So we'd have to work on that language specifically, but there wouldn't be we probably couldn't give pricing in there because by that time, these proposals would be voided. So we'd have to basically get a feedback from the community and then go out for another proposal in response to their vote. So I think it's more of a yes or no. And City Attorney Niles, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that at all.
I will, just to the extent that I'm hesitant to put specific numbers in a ballot question, especially because we've seen within the last 6 months how dramatically prices change in a short amount of time. So we would just have to carefully consider the language to make sure it's applicable and provides the necessary information so that voters can make an informed decision.
Thank you, City Attorney. And I guess in terms of that last question, the way it's written, it kind of makes it look like there's really only one option to have single hauler happen within the city. So I would like it to state something along the lines of, would you like to see this question be placed on the ballot, or would you like City Council to make this decision? Just provide a different option instead of making it seem that there's only one way to get single hauler in the city. Member Woodward.
Regarding the leaf at, the late October, early November. In the past, KEB has been doing that roundup or that drop off. And I assume the Sustainability Commission will continue doing that, or I hope they do anyway. I'm just wondering and curious to see if it makes any sense if the city, if Public Works seems to be the ones with the dump trucks, did a pickup maybe twice through the city, twice or something, if we could make sense of that, because I ask my neighbors for their leaves. I compost, and boy, they put them in these great big bags, and then I put them on my lawn, and I take the lawnmower over them into the bag, which grinds them up, put them in my compost, and it's great for the spring. But something like that, I would think the golf course might be interested. I don't know, but I'm just asking to look into something like that.
So just to clarify, Councilmember Woodward, I don't think we definitely want to build upon what the great work that KEB has already done. And I know that was very well received this fall. A lot of participation. I think City Manager Lewis was there and waited quite a while to get through the line. So we definitely I think there's interest, and there's certainly value there in doing some sort of leaf collection. Are you just saying, though, that maybe Public Works would go around the city collecting that? Is that your idea? Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm suggesting that because I know that's the heavy time, and just, it's like watching the street sweepers go by, and the next day the wind blows really hard. And it's like, here we are, right where we were. But yeah, that's,
okay.
If it's of value to this, to Parks and Rec or to the golf course or something like that.
Sure.
Christmas trees are, so.
Yeah, and then use those leaves and compost them in such a manner that we can put them back in the parks or other landscaped areas. Great. Okay. Yeah, we'll certainly look into that.
Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to build off Councilmember Woodward's question earlier around the increase over the 7-year period. And I'm looking at this question, and I'm aware that surveys are an art of their own, but I'm wondering, could it say something along the lines of, not to exceed $35 over the 7-year period or something,
Do
just
the
to make
math.
it really clear for them so they don't think it could be annual.
Okay. Yep. This is great. This is great feedback.
Okay,
so.
good.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm wondering if an open-ended survey question might be useful. In the past, we've gathered some open feedback and summed up some of those comments. And people may have concerns that aren't captured by this particular survey and they haven't commented on already.
Sure.
I think that would be helpful to us.
And Director, last question from me. Just wondering in terms of the contract, I've noticed at previous events that we've thrown in Inglewood, we only have waste. We don't provide recycling. We're giving out bottled water, but there's only one way to put it. Would this allow any city events to have compost, recycling, waste as an option?
Yes. So this also, I probably haven't made this as much of a factor in my previous communications, but we did also, as part of the proposals, receive pricing for collection of both recycling and waste at all of the city facilities. So that was wrapped up. Obviously, the city would still pay for that. That would not be spread to the citizens, but we did get those prices as a part of this, and we did include that they would support at special events. So talked a little bit with Ms. Arnaldi about that and providing whether that's the actual containers and then collecting them afterwards, but doing something in support of city events so that there are options to recycle during, and that's plentiful and a real option so that we can promote that.
Thank you, Director. Any other questions from council? Director DeAndre, I think you got plenty of feedback from council here tonight. Appreciate all the work on this, and yeah, thank you very much for your time
Thank
tonight.
you.
All right, council, we have gone over on time. I think we all want a break now. Is everybody good with that? We'll take a 10-minute break, come back at around 8:10. I show 8 o'clock on that clock, so 10 minutes from now, 8:08 on my computer, but we'll take a 10-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Members of council, we're going to get started here shortly. Member Wink, are you there? Just waiting on Member Wink, and then we'll get started. Guess we'll get started. Up next is Assistant City Manager Tim Dodd. He'll be present to discuss dedicating parking spaces throughout the city for veterans. Assistant City Manager Tim Dodd, go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. So there are several things that I'm going to talk about tonight, but it will be a pretty short presentation. So the proposal is that we place 7 dedicated parking spots around the city for veterans. This is in response to a request from Councilmember Wink in November, shortly after the Veterans Day holiday. And I did want to thank our Public Works Department and our City Attorney's Office for their help on this. So the cost for it would be pretty minimal. It would be $50 approximately per sign. Likely we could do the signs in-house unless a really complicated design is chosen. In your packets, the slide did reference 9 signs. That was the original idea, but we're here tonight proposing 7 signs. So likely, again, we can do them in-house, and it would be about $50 per sign, and we could absorb the costs. These are just a few ideas that I found and that our Public Works Department found. Certainly would love your input if you would like to move forward with this idea on what you would like the design to look like. Any of these would, again, be around the $50 cost. If you had, other creative ideas, there might be a little bit of a difference in the cost. What we're proposing in terms of locations. So it is important to note that we believe that we can place these on public right-of-ways, so on streets. However, we're recommending 7 locations that are basically in city-owned parking lots. We tried to do a variety of locations really around the city, places that people frequent. So the recreation centers, the golf course, 2 at the Civic Center, so one basically on the 2nd floor in the parking area, and then one in the front here. And then also in the downtown area, one of the large parking lot that the city owns off of Broadway, and then in front of the police department. I did want to point out, too, that you may have seen and may be aware that the city at least has 2 Wounded Warrior parking spaces. So there's actually one right out here, and there's one in the rec center. So those are for disabled veterans. It was through a nonprofit. I'm not sure exactly what year they were placed, but the city does have at least 2 of those in existence right now. They are not considered regulatory, so as a result, they are not enforceable. It's really more of an honor system, more of an encouragement situation. But the city, again, is allowed, if you so choose, to add locations that are on public right-of-ways. We believe, again, we are able to do that if you would like to do that. So the timeline, this would be, if you support the idea, it would be relatively quick, relatively speaking, for us to put them up in the next month or 2. And we would certainly work with our communications team to make sure people were aware of what they are, the importance of supporting veterans, and why we decided to do this as a city. So the 3 questions that I have tonight for discussion are, number 1, the location. So again, we're proposing 7 locations. Do you support those locations or have other ideas? Number 2, do you like any of the particular designs that we showed you or have any other ideas for design elements? And then number 3, do you have any other ideas or suggestions related to the development and implementation of this program? So that's the presentation.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager. Any questions from council? Member Wink.
Sorry, Mayor, I have no questions. I just wanted to address his questions.
I'm sorry, what was that, Member Wink? I missed the last part.
I didn't have questions. I was ready to address the questions Mr. Dodd raised.
Sounds good. Let's hold off on that portion. Let's see if well, Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
It kind of seems to me like this presentation assumes that we intend to approve this. And one of the questions that is missing from the discussion thus far as I'm concerned, is whether or not we want to move forward. I know this came forward at the request of a council member. The body consented to discussion of the matter, but I'm not sure that I personally, and I don't want to speak for the rest of my council members, but I'm not personally at a place where I'm ready to approve this. So I think we can have that discussion first, and that might be more productive, and then go to design if the rest of the body is ready to move forward.
Does any other member of council have any other questions before moving on to Mayor Pro Tem's comment, which I believe is a pertinent point to start there before getting to the last set of questions? I don't see any questions. So I guess in terms of where council is in terms of moving forward with the suggestion of veterans parking, Mayor Pro Tem, did you want to add anything else, or you don't have to? I'm just wondering.
Well, I think you could tell from my earlier comments where the direction I'm leaning, but if I'm, if it's 6-1, or if there's no other council members that share a similar concern, then it's not worth discussing any further. We can just move on.
Any other members of council want to weigh in? Member Anderson.
Well, I guess I do have a kind of a question on this. Is in choosing these locations, was there consideration given for how full these parking lot gets, how the public is going to be made aware of this? I mean, if we put a veteran parking spot in a parking lot that rarely fills, then it doesn't seem like it's, it would be helpful for the veteran, but it wouldn't have a big impact on the city. If we put it in a place where the parking lots fill up, tend to fill up quickly, and there happen to be no veterans there, there's just a parking spot, sitting open, then it could it impede the usefulness of the parking lot? Was there consideration given to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we really looked at locations, A, that it would be easiest to do this because we own the property, and B, that we know had quite a bit of flow. Some of these lots are relatively large. Like, for example, I know the Recreation Center is a large lot. However, when I've been there, I know at like 5:30 or 6 it gets filled, or close to filled pretty quickly. The police department is obviously a smaller lot. The Civic Center ones out here, there's less parking. Obviously, there's quite a bit of parking back there that usually doesn't get filled up. So it was in consideration, but it was primarily, again, based on the ease of the location and the flow that we saw there.
And where are the Wounded Warrior ones presently?
So the two that I know of, and there may be others that I haven't seen, one is right out here on the second floor, and then one is in front of the rec center, the Inglewood Rec Center.
Because I would hesitate to duplicate, duplicate those in places where, are we really going to have two veterans parking at the same time? I mean, they're functionally, one's more restrictive than the other, but they're both for veterans in a sense. So those are those are some of my hesitations about it.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question around the other considerations that we have in the city for veterans. Are you aware of other maybe discounts or special considerations that we have that are existing currently?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any currently. I believe the state may do some, and Arapahoe County does have a veterans department where veterans can apply for certain, I believe, programs related to taxes and things like that. I think there's some at the state level related to license plates and things like that, but I'm not aware of any that the city does.
Thank you.
Member Woodward.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. I guess the first thing that came up to me in reading this was, why are we only limiting that to that number? I mean, I guess I would have thought, okay, maybe 2 at each site. And we have on the second page that very nice picture of the Veterans Monument, Inglewood, 2014. The only monument in Inglewood, other than the Purple Heart, it's at Inglewood High School, and I think there should be a sign there. So my opinion would be that's another place to put one.
Any other comments, Member Woodward?
No, that was it. Just one?
Thank you, Member Woodward. I do have a question. The city parking lot off of Broadway, is that on the east side of the Paseo, or where are we talking about?
The one like behind Breakfast Queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess that kind of goes to Member Anderson, or I kind of second Member Anderson's point, is that parking lot gets a lot of traffic at specific parts of the day. So taking up that one space may be disadvantageous depending on the time of day. So I guess to just where I'm kind of sitting on this right now, I probably would be against it as well. Just because there's a couple of areas that I can see that may potentially, that extra stop may come handy at certain parts, but I'd be fine either way on the direction that council wants to go, but I'd say no at this point. Anyone else want to weigh in? Member Newnenkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I think hearing just off the top of your head that we weren't aware of any other considerations for veterans in our community is something that I would like to know more about before we move forward. I think that recognizing those who have defended our freedoms is something that's really admirable and something that we could integrate into our culture. But I would like to do so having a conversation with that community in our city. Like, I'd like to talk to maybe the veterans groups or the Legion in the community and say, is this meaningful for you? Would this make you feel honored? Would you rather have maybe a discounted rec center membership or something else that would be more meaningful? And I think that there was some constituent and some community work that I'd like to see us do before we move forward with this honor specifically.
Thank you, Member Newnenkamp. Anyone else want to weigh in? Member Wink, I think I know where you stand on this issue, but anything else you want to state on the case, Member Wink, or no? Member Anderson.
I like Councilmember Newnenkamp's idea, though I'm happy to move forward with this too, as long, just thinking about, maybe dialing back so that we're not putting them in already crowded parking lots, but just putting them in places where it gives the veteran somewhere to park close to the door without limiting the number of parking spots. So I don't know which all parking lots that would include, but maybe dial it back to like 5 or something like that. But follow this up with doing more for the veteran community as well. So I'm happy to move forward on it, but maybe just reduce the ones in those busier parking lots.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any other comments from council? Right now, it seems like we might be split and not really have a majority in terms of moving forward. It sounds like the best plan of action may be to what Member Newnenkamp stated, and Member Anderson kind of seconded as well. Member Russell.
I'm not exactly sure where I would stand on this right now. I am married to a veteran. I greatly appreciate all that the veterans have done for our freedom. And I do want to make sure that we honor them. I'm not sure that my husband would park in one of those spots, even though he is a veteran. But I do believe that, if there was no other place to park, but he would probably leave it for somebody that he would respect higher than himself. So I actually appreciate Councilmember Noonan Kemp's suggestion that perhaps we get a veterans group in here to see and let the veterans weigh into what would be most advantageous for them or most supportive for them. I mean, I will support it either way because I greatly appreciate the veterans, and I just know, that especially the veterans now, I mean, most of the World War II veterans are gone. There's still some of them around, but the Vietnam veterans were very disenfranchised by the community. And I believe that, we do need to support them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. So what I'm hearing is that we should reconvene on this issue, find get our veteran community together, find out ways that we can show our appreciation for their service to this country. And this may be an item that is part of this as well, but to just have further dialogue with our veteran community. Am I understanding that correctly? Is everyone okay with that? Sounds great. See a lot of head nodding. City Manager Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I just ask for maybe your suggestions on this? I want to make sure that we're meeting council's expectations in that we had a unanimous support to put this on the agenda, and it's not on the strategic plan. So how would you like us to do the outreach? Do you know of groups? What are your expectations?
Mayor Pro Tem Ward, if you wanted to jump in on this.
Yeah, I just have one possible suggestion. There's a VFW post not far from here. That would be where I would start if I was looking for veterans. So that might be the most useful location to engage. At the very least, they would probably have other suggestions for other places to talk to, but I think that would be a good start for me. And I'm supportive of bringing this discussion further along the path. I'm just not ready to move tonight. I too have great respect for the people who serve the country. That's not what tabling this is about for me tonight. It's about finding something that works best for the whole community. So that's where I'm at.
Member Noonenkamp and then Member Woodward.
Yes, so if the county does have a veterans committee, I think that would also be someone that we could reach out to. But I feel like this is almost, we started a little narrow, and I'd like us to zoom out a little bit about if we want to increase the ways that we honor and recognize veterans in the Inglewood community, what are the options for us to do that, or something that I would like to know. And then specifically from that community within Inglewood, what would they prefer? What would feel the most honoring to them? And so I think there's a lot of different ways we could do that, and I would be curious what other kind of maybe options are on the menu besides just this one, and then bring that back for a conversation if that's helpful.
Member Woodward.
Yeah, I would like to just make sure we get further than veterans of foreign wars. I mean, because there's plenty of people that have served, weren't not in war, and very valuable service. Lots that didn't even leave this country. So, I don't know what those groups are, but I want to make sure that we have a rounded group. And I'm sure we have that in the community.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. I wonder if we could just put put a brief survey out for veterans specifically. I know we'd be casting, a lot of other people would see it, but just get a broad, on the social media kind of survey from veterans to see what they would find helpful. I mean, I'm not seeing this as the kind of thing we need to, bring in a veterans group to have a meeting with city council, but just make sure we've gathered some ideas from outside to discuss at a future study session. That's the way I would see that. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Council. Anything else? No? Assistant City Manager, thank you very much for the presentation tonight. And thank you very much. Moving on to the last agenda item Moving to agenda item 8, City Council Policy Manual Discussion. City Attorney Tamara Niles is back to present and to discuss with council a review of the council policy manual.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Tonight, I'm presenting on the 2021 City Council policies. This is both a general overview of what the council policies currently require as approved by motion by the City Council last fall. And then I do have a few proposals written into the PowerPoint to determine if council wishes to amend the policies. Of course, this is just a guide that council approves by motion. So it can be approved, amendments can also be approved by, by motion. So this was just adopted September 7th, 2021. 22-page guide that just provides some general guidance regarding officers, employees, meetings, our agendas, and that sort of thing. My office does monitor the policy manual to ensure compliance, advise council on what the policies say, and then to propose revisions as necessary. And my usual disclaimer, this is intended to be a general overview only. It is a 22-page, fairly detailed document. In the 2021 amendments, the council incorporated the city club proclamation policy into the handbook, provided permanent provisions for remote and video attendance that were previously approved through COVID-related orders. It authorizes the mayor to schedule fully electronic meetings to determine if an in-person meeting is not feasible, and it currently prohibits remote attendance at executive session. And this presentation generally follows the order of the council policies, if you are following along with the policies themselves. The mayor and the mayor pro tem are chosen by a majority vote of city council. The term of both is 2 years, and they're elected by council at the second meeting in November after the election. The mayor is the chair of the meetings, and the mayor pro tem is the chair in the mayor's absence. If both happen to be absent, we address that as well. Council elects a temporary chairperson for that meeting. The charter, and as reflected in the council policies, require 3 staff members to attend every council meeting, which is the city manager, city attorney, and city clerk, or their designee. So if we have to be absent, then we designate one of our assistants or deputies to appear in our place. Other employees of the city are only required to attend upon request of the city manager or their department head, which generally would just be if they're presenting at the meeting. Per charter, city council must meet 2 times per month. The policy manual establishes the regular meeting schedule as the first and third Monday of the month, or Tuesday if Monday's a holiday, or otherwise is designated by council. And the time of the meeting is also designated by council. Special meetings may be called, and it's addressed in the policy manual as well. And it specifically states that agenda packets are available by 5 p.m. the Thursday prior to the meeting. Also, 5 members of City Council are a quorum, but 3 members constitute a meeting under COMA. I wanted to raise, which is the Colorado Open Meetings Act. So I wanted to raise that because if 3 council members are together discussing city business, technically it's a meeting under state law, but we can't actually transact business without 5 of you. Meeting procedure, City Council has adopted Bob's Rules of Order, which is a very abbreviated version of Robert's Rules of Order, which is a book that's about 2 inches wide. And it's really a fairly short brochure to provide a simple procedure for small meetings such as the size of the City Council. Council policies do provide an order of agenda, and it does include the invocation. I know this has been an item of discussion, so I wanted to raise if council wanted to consider amendment to address that issue. The council policies also describe the consent agenda that are routine, non-controversial topics that may be adopted by a single motion. But any council member may remove an item that was scheduled for consent agenda with prior notice to city manager. And this allows staff to be able to gather the information requested by that council member in order for them to make an informed decision of the topic. Legislation, which is, of course, ordinances and resolutions, can only have one general subject. But in my experience, a general subject can be somewhat broad. It's not limited to a single section of code, for example. In addition, motions should always be in the affirmative, meaning I move that council take action, not I move to disapprove, which would be a negative. Ordinances, we have a first reading and a second reading. On the first reading, it is called a council bill. After introduction, a council member may then move to amend the provisions in the ordinance, which requires 4 votes to approve the amendment. The second reading has to be at least 7 days after the first reading, and the document must be in the identical form on both first and second reading. So let's say it comes for second reading and council determines it should be amended, then the date of amendment becomes the first reading of the ordinance in that form, and then we will have a second reading in the same form. Our ordinances are effective 30 days after publication of final passage. So to become effective, we have a first reading, a second reading, and if passed on second reading, it would become effective then 30 days thereafter. There is an exception for emergency ordinances, though, because they require effective immediate, given that they are an emergency. Then resolutions and motions only require a majority of the quorum present to pass. Public comment is also provided in the policies, and the public comment should not be addressed to a single council member. Of course, no one making public comment can make threats of violence or harm. If they schedule their public comment in advance, council policies allow them up to 5 minutes to speak. If it's unscheduled, it's 3 minutes. And people can also submit written communications to be included in the agenda. Similar for public hearings, speakers should sign up in advance. They have 3 minutes to speak. The petitioner is given time for rebuttal to respond to any comments. And then we do provide public hearing procedures specifically in Inglewood Municipal Code, and quasi-judicial hearings are specifically also addressed in Municipal Code. Then we also have specific rules of decorum, which generally is be respectful to each other and the public. For example, the policies specifically say members can't leave without permission from the chair. The chair must recognize any member before speaking. We shouldn't interrupt. It's similar to the rules we learned in grade school. Be gracious and respectful. Also be attentive. And it specifically notes that as a 7-member board, things work better if we are able to negotiate, work through issues, and compromise. Also use of electronics during public meetings. City Council, of course, we all sit here with our electronic devices. However, it is a violation of the policy to use those for texting, emailing, or other communications during public meetings. But I wrote potentially revise to reference attorney communications. For example, occasionally something may arise and that perhaps I need to let the mayor know that it's protected by attorney-client privilege. We shouldn't discuss this or something like that. So in my communication with the mayor, it's protected by attorney-client privilege. It's not, doesn't become an open record. So that may be something council wishes to consider. We also have provisions on study sessions. The same information is provided to all members to ensure you all receive the same information to make your decisions. The council directs both the city manager, myself, and other staff by consensus for placement on future agendas. We receive, of course, direction to draft legislation. And if there is a consensus during a study session, it's not binding on you at a later date. You can change your mind, you can receive additional information. Just because you say to move forward with hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., if it comes before you for an ordinance, you can certainly change your mind. It also provides council discretionary funds, $600 per year per council member. And then there's some fairly extensive descriptions on what council members should or should not do with those funds. It specifically refers to council member travel. The city does fund a single out-of-state conference per year. It also specifically states you can use those funds for council responsibilities or city business, such as books or published materials, and that sort of thing. There is some internal inconsistencies regarding constituent communications that council may wish to address. It does state that generally those are paid for personally, but then it makes exceptions. It specifically refers to mass mailings, which are authorized to constituents. It does say you can't use discretionary funds within 90 days of an election. But I thought council may wish to reconsider this, given that citizen outreach and involvement and communication perhaps should be encouraged by council members. Perhaps not if they're running for re-election, because people could misconstrue that. But in a general year, it may be a good idea to promote efforts to provide additional communication to our citizens. There are specific prohibitions on these funds. No holiday greetings unless it's incidental, no pre-stamped envelopes, and then of course no constituent communications within 90 days of your own election. There are also provisions regarding the Colorado Open Records Act, regarding statements at the bottom of your email so people know when they communicate with you that it's probably open record, but not always. There are exceptions, of course. Also, email communication between 3 or more members can inadvertently create a public meeting because, as we just stated, 3 or more members communicating is an open meeting under the Open Meetings Act. So just be careful with email communications. You can email a single council member, but don't email with 3 or more. So I reply to all. Never do that with other council members on an email chain. But it's because of this reason, when I send an email to the entire council, I send a single email to each council member, both to ensure you have this exact same information, but that no one can reply to all and then inadvertently violate the Open Meetings Act. The provisions also apply to vacancies, how vacancies are filled by city council. But if 3 or more vacancies, then we are required to have a special election. Okay, electronic participation was something that we modified fairly significantly in 2021. We recognize that it is possible for a council member to have meaningful participation when attending electronically. The preferred method, of course, is video conference, and it does count as actual attendance for a quorum of the meeting, but council specifically stated that at least 4 members must be physically present at a meeting unless the mayor calls a meeting for council to determine if an in-person meeting is not feasible. And this was in direct response to council meeting in their cars in the parking lot at the beginning of the pandemic when we were prohibited from meeting in person. Currently, there is a prohibition for electronic participation at an executive session unless there's no in-person meetings at all. But this may be something council wants to reconsider. I know the first time we had an executive session after this prohibition went into effect, I had some questions about it because we did have some members attending electronically. But it does state that if you do not attend an executive session, you may review the audio recording of that executive session within 90 days. The city clerk maintains that. It also provides for annual performance reviews for the city manager and myself, and it states that you will meet annually with the municipal judge to discuss the court budget. There is an agenda setting provision as well. We meet weekly with the mayor and mayor pro tem to discuss the agenda. And both Sean, myself, and the city clerk always attend that. Usually other staff members attend as well. There is also on there, if there is a council consensus to put something on the agenda, that it shall be on the agenda within 30 days. In my own experience, I found that this is not always feasible. For example, council had directed me to consider a possible amendment or pursue efforts to amend state law regarding public consumption on right-of-way. And that process is just taking some time to be able to reach the stakeholders and to give an update. So I don't know if requiring it within the agenda on 30 days is always feasible, and maybe state that it should be a preference or something like that. And then, of course, we have a proclamation policy that will be coming before the council shortly to consider potential proclamations. But there must be a consensus to place it on the scheduled agenda, and it goes on the council member's choice the week prior if it's at the request of a council member. Well, I went through that faster than I anticipated. At this time, I would welcome any questions you have.
Thank you, City Attorney Niles. Any questions from council? Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. As one of the new members of council, I find it very helpful. And as I was reviewing the policies, I did come across one that wasn't in your presentation that I wonder if we should look at. And I want your opinion on, it has to do with voting. So it's L1 on page 98 of the packet. And it says that we shall vote verbally or through the operation of voting lights. And I am aware that we are considering changes to electronic voting, and I'm wondering if that's a nuance that needs to be addressed and if it's something that we should do now or wait for when that system goes into effect. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yes. I should tell you that during this process, I have gone through the policies and proposed some changes that I think are just cleanup items. So that would be what I would consider a cleanup item that would be brought to council's attention when we're talking about some substantive changes. But that would be votes should be indicated yes or no or A or nay, but to remove that it has to be done verbally.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Member Woodward.
I don't know if I have a question or a comment. With regard to public hearings, quasi-judicial hearings, specifically follow EMC 1-1027, where you mentioned privileged texting or emailing between the attorney and the mayor, I would support that.
Well, I won't scroll back through. I know the section you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, but you had brought that up, and I would support that. I see when there's a need for that at times, and have been in the situation where there was a need for it. Also, regarding outside, okay, I'm sitting. Discretionary funds prohibitions, no holiday greetings unless incidental. Typically, I think, most cities, the mayor sends out on behalf of city council and administration and staff of the city holiday greetings to other cities. And I'm sure you've received some. I know I received at least a couple, I think, this year already. But I think that's pretty normal and typical, and I wouldn't consider that part of discretionary funds, personally.
I I would have to contact communications about that, but I would assume that is paid from the city versus the mayor's discretionary funds. If it's something the city does as a matter of course, that would come out of a different fund. But if it's something the mayor said, this year I want to do this specific item, then that would be from that $600
Okay.
discretionary.
Okay, well, I guess what I was reading was no holiday greetings unless incidental. And then I don't know, I just wanted to make sure that the mayor had the opportunity to do that. I know I did it.
Anything else,
Yeah, I think
Member Woodward?
Let's see. Meeting declared not feasible. I'm sorry, I've written these down as we went through that.
Do you mind if I go to Mayor Pro Tem?
Okay, just
Well,
here's, I think this is my last one. Under agenda settings, if council consensus placed on an agenda within 30 days revise, this timeline is not always possible. Can't we just add some use best efforts for 30 days or to 30 days? And doesn't that kind of clean it up with
Yes,
that?
I think so, as long as there's some discretion.
I would recommend that.
Okay.
Anything else,
That's-
Member
that's
Woodward?
it.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Mayor Pro Tem?
One item that I've wondered about from time to time that seems to be missing from our council policy manual is the matter of internal discipline. So we have a provision in our charter, Charter 32, and the last line of Charter 32 says, attempted dictation, direction, or interference on the part of any member of council shall be deemed misconduct. But the charter is mute on how council misconduct is addressed. So I'm wondering if you have any experience in other municipalities or some familiarity with procedures of cities that perhaps reformed more recently that might have a procedure for censure or some other internal disciplinary process up to and potentially including the procedure that the State House recently exercised within the last 10 years or so, expulsion. Obviously, that's an extreme scenario, but I'd be interested in evaluating all the options there.
I have seen policies that don't include expulsion because I take the position that that is the purview of the voters to determine if conduct is so egregious that they should no longer be an elected representative of the citizens. The policies that I see and support generally provide for some sort of verbal reprimand. There can be a formal reprimand, and it's all from action by the rest of the council. There could be a resolution regarding the misconduct. But you could potentially include some sort of ethics report, something like that. So I would be happy to draft a proposed policy to include in council policies to guide the council. If nothing's in there, council could address it on a case-by-case basis to determine whether it wishes to take action. Even if it is in there, council still has discretion to determine what action it wishes to take, if any, because it's solely within council's discretion.
It's something that I think would be helpful to have some guidelines and policy on. Fortunately, the current body is not one that is afflicted with such a problem, but the potential does exist for that to occur in the future. So I think that would be helpful. I wouldn't want you to go through the effort without the consent of at least a majority of my fellow members, however.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Russell?
Thank you, Mayor. And I have a question on public comment, and one of the, the very first thing under only allowed during public comment time or public hearings, it says should not be addressed to a single council member. And I'm just kind of wondering if that limits the First Amendment rights of the citizens to a certain extent. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And I mean, sometimes I think individual council members may cause a grievance for citizens. And so I'm wondering, could that be a violation of someone's constitutional right? I mean, I
Well-
understand threats are not legal.
So, of course, we would never enforce any council policy that would violate someone's First Amendment right. This is to be a guide intended kind of like the decorum to state you should not use this opportunity to target a single council member. We are here to talk about issues. We're here to represent the city as a whole. But in general, this is to be a guide and to ask the people stick to the issues, not to attack a single council member.
Okay, thank you.
Member Anderson.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in. I mean, my read on this is that the things that you've laid out as, potentially for amendment, that kind of thing, are things to discuss. But overall, I'm not. I don't know when. I think we did do some revisions on the policy manual last year, perhaps, and then maybe some more substantial ones before I was on council, if I remember right, 2018 or something like that. Overall, as I'm looking through these policies, I'm like, it looks pretty good. So I don't know if I'm really want to push to see a lot of change. And then specifically, I wanted to weigh in on Member Ward's question about the idea of having something in there for reprimand. We've had this, when we've had issues with council members before. I feel like the addressing it on a case by case basis, because there's nothing that prohibits council from taking a vote to censure someone or something like that, even though it's not in the policy manual. I prefer to think of that as something that's not going to happen. And if it does happen, we have to come up with something. But I don't think I think each situation may call for a different kind of response. And so addressing it on a case by case basis is really fine with me, rather than having a specific set of policies. Though, if we do need to do that, I think it's something we should do, but I'm not opposed to just leaving that out at this point. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. I'll jump in with my next question, and actually, to the question for Mayor Pro Tem Ward, I actually would lean towards having something in council policy about whether it's a baseline or just, I understand where Member Anderson's coming from in terms of everything being a case-by-case basis, but also just understanding what is possible and having that as part of council policy instead of, obviously this council will turn over at a certain point. I haven't seen a reason in the recent past for us to do this, but there's a couple of situations I could think of that potentially would merit something that's, that we may have to discuss. So I would think that would be something I'd like to see. I like some of the other comments that you stated in here. I agree with the communication aspect of it as well. I've always been a little bit confused about what we can and can't do in terms of communicating with our citizens. So I did want that to get cleaned up a little bit. The other thing that just came up recently, and I just completely forgot about it, but when invocation came back at the beginning of this year, I believe it was, that kind of threw me off guard in terms of, I think we kind of stopped doing it during COVID. I'm not sure if it started before that, but I know during at least the past year, we stopped doing invocation. And so I personally have been a little bit uneasy about doing invocation. I'm not against it, but I do feel that maybe this isn't the best avenue in terms of actually having invocation. So I would be up for just relooking that portion of the policy I'm not sure if my fellow council members are in agreement with this, but that would be something that I would like to look at. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to continue doing the invocation as a long-standing tradition in Inglewood and in legislatures across the country, and of course the United States Senate and Representative have done invocations since they were first formed, I believe, going way back. Every day, an invocation at the beginning of this meeting, and I think it's just a tradition that acknowledges that that our governing authorities answer to a higher power, and consecrating that our governing time as something significant in that way, I think is really important. So I would definitely not want to see the invocation go away.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with the sentiments that Councilmember Anderson shared, and it is a longstanding policy in the city of Inglewood. The invocation went away during COVID. It was here up to that point, and it was not because we discussed on council to remove it. And so I was very thankful that it came back. I believe I was told by the city clerks, and I don't know if this is totally correct, that because we were having special meetings and only one meeting, it just made the agenda easier. But I think it was really sad that it got eliminated during that time. But it is, the United States of America was founded on Christian principles. They have always had a chaplain in the United States House and Senate. And so I would like to continue that. I do believe it was instituted by our founding fathers, and it's been a longstanding policy here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Woodward.
I can go along with an invocation. However, I have a problem when it's, as Joe had said, Christian. When the invocation ends with, in Jesus' name, or something like that, that's where it's not okay with me. I think we should be inclusive of all the citizens of our community, and I know we have a Muslim community here. Certainly have a Jewish community here. But if we're going to do it with that type of, by saying that, I think we ought to add other prayers to a list. I think the city manager's office has provided in the past a list of prayers. And as I recall, I think they were non-denominational. But that's my opinion. Otherwise I wouldn't want it in there if it was just going to be one Christian type prayer. And the other thing, I think the agenda has been, the Pledge of Allegiance comes before the invocation, I believe. And we've been doing the last two meetings, the invocation first. So you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then there's an invocation. And I'd like to get back to that. My opinion.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. City Attorney Niles, I saw in your presentation that you did flag the invocation as something for us to consider an amendment to. Can you share with us a little bit about what maybe the legal considerations are for having an invocation at a council meeting, or one that is maybe from a specific faith or denomination or something like that, and things that we should be considering in this conversation?
Certainly. It has been the subject of litigation in the past 10, 15 years or so, and gone all the way to the Supreme Court, which did specifically recognize there is a historic basis for inclusion of prayer to start meetings, and it has been since this country was founded. However, it is my recommendation that if we do continue the practice, that we have a policy to ensure compliance with applicable case rulings to hopefully immunize us from potential liability for lawsuits that people may claim that we are advocating for a specific religion or something of that sort. There is a second potential prong of liability that lies in employment law, because when employees are required to attend our meetings, there is case law on it that says in that case, employees need to be given the opportunity to not be required to participate in a Christian-based prayer. And they should be given the opportunity to lodge not a complaint, but their objection to it, and then we would act accordingly. So two potential prongs of liability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Noonan-Camp. Member Russell.
This actually came up probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I do have a newspaper article at home. I believe it was on May 5th of 2014 that the Supreme Court ruled that city councils could have prayer even representing a specific religion. For instance, if they pray in Jesus' name, it was okay to do that. The Supreme Court ruled that that was not a violation of anyone. And I can get that article and bring it next time for anybody that's interested in seeing it. And thank you.
I'm also
Thank you,
happy
Member
to.
Russell.
I'm also happy to present a legal analysis. It was a 5-4 decision, really well publicized among the city attorney listservs and things like that.
Thank you, City Attorney. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to respond to Councilmember Woodward's concerns about praying specifically in the name of Jesus, because I did do that tonight, and I only do that because when I pray to the God I actually believe in, and I would expect any council member or anyone else who did the invocation to pray in the truth of their conscience in the way that they actually believe. So this was not my attempt to establish a religion for everybody else, but if I'm offering the prayer, I'm offering the prayer on the basis of my actual beliefs about the universe and who rules over all things. And I would expect anybody to do that. So that's not intended to make a claim as for city council as a whole or anything like that. That's just when I'm praying what I actually believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any other comments from council? Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
I'm not personally attached to the invocation. I'm attached to council following the policies that we've established for ourselves. So if it was up to me, we would remove the invocation from the council policy manual as a required event for each of our regular sessions. That would be my choice. I think that's a choice that allows every member of this body and every member of the public in Inglewood to serve whatever entity they serve, divine, human, or otherwise, not serve whatever entity they choose not to serve, and it leaves the city completely neutral on the matter. Just because we did something in the past and we're not doing it now, I don't view that as an assertion that what we did in the past was wrong. I may be alone on that, but that's how I see it. I don't view it as necessary. I view it as potentially harmful to certain people in our city, although that may be the minority of people in our city. I think it might be time to move past it. So that's where I'm at on it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson, do you have another comment? Any other comments from council? I see two pending issues here, going back to, well, one, just the current topic of discussion, just invocation, but also Mayor Pro Tem Ward's item in terms of a form of discipline, I guess, in a sense. So I guess do members of council want to weigh in on both? In terms of just discipline, I think Mayor Pro Tem Warren and myself were in favor of at least looking at specific language. Member Anderson was against it, if I understood that correctly.
I'm happy to have the discussion. I think some general, general language might be helpful. I just don't want to prescribe a, one clear path that needs to be followed. That was my main thing.
Okay. Anybody in disagreement with that? Of at least looking at the issue? Okay, and in terms of just invocation, where people stand in terms of yes, no, keep it as part of council policy or not? Does anybody else want to weigh in? Member Noonekamp?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a really challenging conversation for us to have, but I think it's also very important. And I resonate with a lot of what members Russell and Anderson say, both as a person of faith and as a member of this body. And then I also hear the concerns raised by our city attorney about some of the legal liabilities that I think leaving the invocation in its current form could raise for our city, the litigation and the potential waste of taxpayer resources that I see that could come if we continue in the way that we've been doing, both maybe by trying to only represent one faith in this situation, but then also with the employment liability. And so I wonder if there's a compromise or a path forward that this council would support by replacing the current invocation with a moment of silence or an opportunity for folks who pray to any God or to no God at all who are represented in this city to have a moment to address potentially a higher power, or to just have a moment of peace before we move into the work representing the citizens of this city. And I wonder if that's a path forward for us. I would love to know if anyone's supportive of that.
Member Woodward?
I could certainly be in support of that and in bringing up a commitment of service to our community as our work.
Thank you, I'm sorry, go ahead, Member Woodward. Anything else?
I was just saying, as some sort of compromise, I think that's a good suggestion, Chelsea. And I guess my preference would be that we didn't have an invocation. Or that it was very much non-denominational.
Thank you, Member Woodward.
Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I have no objection to the compromise position of a moment of silence. I find it hard to imagine any reasonable person would. I would not support the variety pack of religions being presented on a weekly basis. I think, although I'm not generally personally offended by people who share their religious beliefs, I can anticipate the possibility that there might be some religious beliefs or some religions that I do not support, and I would not like to be forced to stand as if I am supporting those. So a moment of silence is a better compromise position than a mandate for some sort of variety, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson?
Thank you, Mayor. I am happy. I think some further discussion is warranted. One possibility is to invite, faith leaders from the community in to offer an invocation that's, not selecting any one particular religion, but is something that different faith leaders could sign up for, or something like that. That would change it from, or like I know council used to, for a time at least, would rotate between all the different council members to let them offer an invocation to whatever God they believed in. So I think there are different options, but I do think there's something potent about a spoken invocation, acknowledging that what we are doing when we gather as a city council is we're not the highest power. We're not even, even our president and Supreme Court isn't the highest power. That we all are held accountable to someone above us, and that that could be expressed in any number of religions. Some that I would disagree with, and others that I wouldn't. But having that, I mean, I guess if we end up with a moment of silence, that's not the end of the world, but I think we're losing something really significant when we do that, and would much prefer to come up with another solution.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with that. I believe it is important for us to acknowledge that there is someone higher than us that's ultimately in control of things that are going on. There are, and I mean, I know that this packet here was put out by the city, and they are fairly generic. And I also know when I first got on council, I was asked to be the chaplain, which meant I said the prayer and led the Pledge of Allegiance. And I did that for the first 2 years I was on. Before I got on council altogether, Bob McCaslin was the chaplain. And I think historically, councils have had a chaplain. I know that when Linda was the mayor, we did take turns. I mean, and so people that wanted to do that, I'm okay with either way, but I do think it is important to acknowledge that there is someone higher than us that we are going to be held responsible to for the decisions that we do make. And I think it's a good reminder for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Wink, did you want to state anything on the topic?
No, thank you, Mayor.
So I guess I'll just chime in. I would be in favor of the moment of silence. I understand the viewpoints of Member Anderson and Member Russell, as well as the rest of council. I would be okay moving in that direction. So just looking at the names, I think that would be majority, at least 4 votes on that. So I'd be happy to do that moving forward. Obviously, we would have to change the council policy in order to do that, but any other comments from council regarding this? Not sure if you were going to lean, or Member Russell, go ahead.
I just wanted to know if we're going to change the council policy, do we need to do a formal action and a vote during a city council meeting?
Yes, that would be the case. City Attorney Niles, did you want to state on what that timeline may look like?
Certainly. Council policies do include a provision that regarding amendment of the policies, and it does, on its face, require presentation of written proposed amendments and then approval at the next meeting. However, if council wanted to move forward with it immediately, technically we could do a vote tonight because we have established this as a special meeting where a vote could be taken. This is an agenda item, and the requirement that it be presented at a prior meeting was established by a prior council, so it can't be binding to limit the authority of this council. So that was a long answer to say we could address it tonight, but we could wait and address it under the amendment provision of the policies.
Thank you, City Attorney. I would be okay just waiting until the next meeting. We're off next Monday, but having it as part of the discussion on the 7th, I believe. So everybody in favor of that? Let's see some head nodding. Yes, yes. I think yes. So anything else from members of council? City Attorney Niles? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Raise the issue of potentially changing executive session attendance remotely, and the use of discretionary funds to expand it for citizen outreach and communication.
I think I already voiced where I stood on the citizen communication. I would be in favor of just cleaning up that language. I would be in favor of just making a bit of, I've always been confused by it, but yeah, I would like to see that changed. The executive session, I was unaware of the, you stated that previously there were a couple council members that were remote during an executive session. I don't remember that, but I would be okay doing a mix of the two, depending on what that council member was comfortable with. Anybody else want to chime in? Member Russell.
Thank you. I would like to leave the policy the way it is with 4 council members have to be in person in order to do an executive session. There are inherent problems with people attending executive session by Zoom, because in an executive session, you can only have the people that are there. When you are remote, you don't know if somebody's walking through the room, you don't know. I mean, ideally, we probably should limit it to only in person, and then, I mean, in the past, I'm not even sure you could listen to a copy of the tape within 90 days. I think that's fairly new. So I think we were forced into things during the 1.5 years or however long that we were under the emergency order. But I think it's kind of a slippery slope. I think we probably should leave it the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Anyone else want to chime in? Mayor Pro Tem?
I've flip-flopped on this a couple times, but I'm supportive of what Member Russell just said, limiting executive sessions to in-person attendance just because of the control issues associated with some of the sensitive topics discussed in executive session. With remote attendance, there's really no way to guarantee that someone is not recording the discussion inappropriately through their computer, and a separate copy is being maintained outside the city control. With in-person attendance, again, it's not entirely possible to guarantee that's not occurring, but the likelihood is lower. Everybody's in the room, and nobody's being denied information because the absent members are able to listen to the recording subsequent to the executive session, as long as it falls in the timeline prior to destruction. So I'm happy with changing the policy to require in-person attendance. And I also wanted to say the other policy changes that have been suggested in this document, I would be supportive as well. So I'd like to move forward with those.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson?
I agree with Members Russell and Mayor Pro Tem Ward that we should leave the executive session such that it's only in-person attendance. And I know it sounded like we had, I wasn't exactly sure how it shook out for the invocation thing, but if we're not, I don't know if we're at 4 votes one way or the other on that, but if we have, if I would be interested in seeing a presentation on the broader legal issues, if that's acceptable to the rest of council as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Woodward.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Anderson, I wasn't clear on that. Broader issues of the invocation or of the executive session?
Sorry, the invocation in
Okay.
terms of the Supreme Court decisions and the implications of that, and the 2014 decision or others. That's what I was interested in.
Okay, thank you. I agree with that for executive session, members should be in place and not remote.
Thank you, Member Woodward. City Attorney, do you have everything you need? I think we're still waiting on the communication, right? Do you have
I think I have what I
do
need.
we have the votes? Okay.
As far as the presentation on the legal ramifications of an invocation, I would prefer to do that either in an attorney-client privileged memo or in executive session. For example, if I announce publicly, I think this is a liability and we decide to keep doing it, I would prefer that that be protected by attorney-client privilege, so someone can't sue us and play a video of a public meeting of me speaking.
That does seem to make sense. Thank you, City Attorney. Any other comments from council? Member Neunenkamp?
Would it be possible to get the memo from you in advance of whenever our next Monday meeting is, the first one in February, I guess. So if this is on the agenda, that folks have had a chance to digest that information beforehand?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. Then that would be my recommendation over executive session.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Honestly, council, that could have been a conversation that went sideways. So really appreciate you guys being open to communication on this and yeah, just honestly having an open mind about it. So thank you very much for that. Let me get back to the agenda. I think moving on to agenda item 9. Yeah, reports from boards and commissions, council liaisons. So does anybody have anything reports on that? Nodding heads. I don't think there was much recently. Nope. And then we'll just move on to council members' choice, the travel request for council member Woodward. So member Woodward, do you want to chime in on why this is a special meeting? Do I do this or?
I'm sorry?
So we're moving on to council members' choice. Actually, I think I'm the one that brings this up, but.
Well, I was going to bring the
Oh, you're back to
meeting.
boards? Or are we going back to boards and commissions?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's do
That's
that.
why I hit.
Let's go back one. All right, member Woodward, go ahead.
Okay, Parks and Recreation Commission. The big item we did was take a look at some conceptual drawings for a renovation of Bates Logan Park, 3 different conceptual drawings, which were very preliminary and basically just ideas, which I think commissioners were really pretty pleased with for the most part and somewhat excited about it. Staff had some really good comments and suggestions. So that was, that's kind of what there's some focus on right now. We did hear some numbers on the field usage, field meaning athletic field usages in the parks for the last couple of years. Obviously, COVID 2020 was way down. 2021 was back up with quite a bit of usage. So our fields in the parks are getting used for mostly youth athletic purposes. Let's see. And that's that is about it for that.
Thank you, member Woodward. Anybody else from council? Oh, member Russell, sorry.
Can I just ask a question? I didn't, are there some other parks? Is Bates Logan on the master plan? Or I thought we were addressing like Cushing Park.
Cushing Park is being renovated right now. Baker Park is also coming up.
Centennial as well, right?
I'm sorry?
Centennial Park is the other one as well?
Yeah, and Centennial also.
Okay, they're being done right now.
They're in the process, either waiting on equipment, stuff like that, but Cushing stuff has been going on there for a little bit there.
Okay, thank you.
City manager, did you want to chime in?
Yes, I do just want to report to council that everything that Member Woodward said is correct. We are looking at additional delays, but hope to have these done by the end of summer. But they are all in progress, and not in terms of we have not broken ground, but we are at the precipice of breaking ground. So,
yeah, they did do a for the skate park. Had a very successful forum, I guess, with quite a few people that came and lots of good input that I think the contractor was very pleased with, and I think Parks and Recreation staff were very pleased with getting that type of feedback.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, moving on to agenda item 10, I believe. So this is the travel request for Councilmember Woodward. Member Woodward is going to be traveling to DC, or would like to travel to DC for the National League of Cities Congressional City Conference. Anything that you want to add, Member Woodward?
Yes. First, I want to give my appreciation to Administrative Assistant Krista for all her work on this. She and I have been both going through the National League of Cities website. Primarily, the reason I like going to them is to be able to go to the Saturday and Sunday educational meetings. Well, none of those have come up on their website yet. Earlier in the month, it said something about future or to be shown. Well, now nothing is coming up at all. And those classes, there's on Saturday and Sunday are the main things that I want to attend. So I looked again this morning, there's nothing there. I've tried calling and you go to voicemail, to another voicemail, to another voicemail, and you're not able to get a person. So she and I have been, so I'm looking at this as tentative. I have not filled out per item 5 of our policy the information and the narrative that I need to fill out. What I was trying to do was beat the January 31 early registration date to save a few $100s. But if they are not going to have those classes because of COVID, which I'm guessing is what they're probably waiting on, I probably would not go to this conference and sign up.
So Member Woodward, would you still request the motion tonight for approval? Continue to do your due diligence, continue to, find out whether or not they're going to be running those courses over that weekend? Obviously, we'll leave it to your discretion to.
Well, if I can get an approval, yes, and then by next week, or by the next time we meet, I may have turned it down and said no because the classes didn't come up.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Any questions from council? If not, can I get a motion to approve Member Woodward's request for travel to the NLC conference in March of this year?
I move to approve.
Thank you, Member Nooncamp. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any additional comments? If not, can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Noonenkamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
All votes been cast. Let the record show 7 ayes.
Thank you very much, Member Woodward, for the information.
And thank you, Council and Mayor.
And now moving on to agenda item 11, City Manager's Choice.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a very quick reminder about the retreat this weekend. It will be in the police building, second floor training center, training room rather, and we look forward to seeing everyone there.
Thank you very much for the reminder, City Manager. Anything else? If not, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. It's about 9:35. Have a good evening. We'll see you guys Saturday and then again in 2 weeks. Have a good night.